6% increase, and 30 new psychologists, a 21% increase. As I've gone around the country visiting sites, it's been fantastic to see what these additional roles have meant in terms of supporting our core operations. We've also seen an increase alongside that of prison capacity, with 893 beds brought online, which is an increase of 9.6% of our overall prison capacity. A number of further infrastructure projects are nearing completion or are about to begin. Again, this is great and reassuring to see, and we're continuing to push further in both of these areas. Following the change in government last year, the Minister of Corrections set 4 ministerial priorities, which focus on staff safety, recruitment, capacity and rehabilitation. These were further supported by new initiatives announced in Budget 24, which included a further expansion at Waikaria Prison. As I briefly mentioned earlier, our frontline workforce has been bolstered by a very successful recruitment campaign. And having attended many of the graduation ceremonies for frontline staff, it is clear to me that there is an abundant enthusiasm for the roles they are taking up and the part they will help in helping people in our management and care. Another priority is the safety of our staff. Increasingly, the people we are dealing with, especially in prisons, have histories of violence, mental illness and addiction. That can make some behave erratically and sometimes violently. And ensuring we have the training and equipment to help our staff in these situations is, of course, paramount. That is why we placed so much emphasis on supporting staff safety in prisons as well as community settings. This includes providing tactical training for staff, increasing staff wellbeing and welfare, and introducing a protocol to reduce the risk of violence and aggression towards staff in prisons. Underpinning our future success will be the implementation of our new organisational structure. The pathway forward, Te Ara Whakamua, is a process of change designed to grow our capability, enhance how we deliver our services, and support us deliver on our aspirations for a more effective and efficient corrections system. Importantly, Te Ara Whakamua empowers our frontline staff to lead and make decisions to make that community safer by supporting people to lead corrections better and with brighter prospects. It focuses on our core functions and achieving these consistently while treating people with dignity and decency. So this is where we find ourselves today. We've achieved a lot with many new staff on board, but there is plenty of work for us still to do. With me today are many of the executive leadership team who are all driving this work with me, as well as some technical specialists. I'll no doubt call on them for their specialist knowledge as we continue our discussion today. I'm now more than happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Lee, and I think it's Alicia as well with us. Just note we do have the timers that you've probably seen on the screen, so that will help keep us to time, and that'll just indicate how long the topic areas are that we're running through. We've got our first question from Tracy McClellan.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for being here. We've got a structured interview, a structured agenda today, so my most pressing questions are probably a little bit further on, so Please don't think my first question is top of mind. But as we go through the organisational overview and the audit findings in particular, the one that obviously stands out is the cornerstone infrastructure claim. Can you just describe your process that you've got in place to manage and to provide some oversight over that claim process, which is quite a large claim and obviously hasn't been a very straightforward process because there's been several iterations. Can you just describe the process you've got in place to give us some confidence that that is nearing a completion? And in general, can you just give us some update on the progress against those procurement progress objectives in general?
Sure.
And if this one has deviated from that?
Sure. Well, thank you first. I think for us, the way in which we procure and then seek the execution of large infrastructure projects is something we've built capability around for the last 12 or so years. We are an organisation with very large infrastructure asset base, and Waikaria is one of our largest developments to date, undertaken under a PPP and with Cornerstone Infrastructure Partnerships as our special purpose vehicle partner. They contract with two primary subcontractors. CPB are the construction contractor, and Cushman & Wakefield are the asset management subcontractor. Under a PPP, we construct clarity in terms of the duration of the build. There are clear risks transferred to that partner, and they are then required to manage those risks to deliver within time and to quality. As with any contract, there are extenuating circumstances, and COVID as a global pandemic was one of those. The approach we have taken in managing our way through this is to always hold fast to two things: the key principles of the PPP contracting provisions, making sure that we as a Crown entity never give away those core commercial principles that underpin the contracting structure. So that's always been at the heart of how we have transacted both the dealing of the COVID claim as well as the way in which we've managed then the contract going forward. The second is making sure that we always keep focus on how to keep progress with the work on a day-to-day basis. And that really is underpinned by the local trades who undertake the actual work on the ground in support of, in this phase, the construction partner CPB. So making sure we had a pathway to pay those supply chain parties was a really important part of our strategy as we navigated our way through the COVID claim. And maintaining progress with the build has been the other advantage, I suppose, of maintaining that through connection to ensure they continue to receive their cash flow. For us, in terms of overview, we've maintained really strong connections with both Treasury and the Infrastructure Commission in the way in which we've transacted any of the engagements from a commercial perspective, the way in which we've both dealt with initial early claims to make sure we could continue to pay those supply chain partners, but also the way in which we established what the legitimate parts of the claim were that actually were in accordance with the contract, as well as to be able to call out pretty early those things that we felt they were not justifying in terms of the basis upon which they had that claim. As we work our way through, we are then picking out the individual parts of the contract, subcontractors-wise. CPB and Cornerstone Infrastructure Partners are well progressed. We've got clarity in terms of what those are. So I feel assured that we are very close to agreeing those components and resolving this particular claim. And the third, and as critically important component, is obviously the long-term management of the asset and any implications of asset liabilities that a delay to opening of the facility, which obviously the COVID claim is dealing with, may have. So that's the final piece that we are working through at the moment before we can resolve the entirety of the transaction. As I described at the beginning of kind of this narrative, the thing that we are very we benefit significantly from is the expertise we've built over the last 10 to 12 years around transacting these things. So that core team with long-term domain knowledge is a really important aspect of the value we bring into these discussions, and the continuity of their oversight has been a really, really beneficial part of that process as well. So that sort of frames the overall approach that we've taken to it.
So starts from Tracy and the other type.
Yeah, so just if I could quickly just sup on that, because that's kind of where I'm getting at. On the one hand, it looks like with the government wanting to increase prison numbers, there's going to be some other extension plans involved. So do you have the requisite expertise not to end up in this position with CPB, which is not their first rodeo in terms of litigious nature around COVID claims and things like that? Do you have the requisite skills on board to be able to do that better next time? And is there anything else you've learned through this process to be able to manage what is likely to be further extensions? And I've got some questions later on about the fast tracking of Auckland prison and what that might entail.
Sure.
So as far as this audit sort of section goes, you're feeling that you can move forward in a more positive way?
Yeah, and I think to your what have you learnt, I mean, global pandemics have a material impact on kind of normal course transactions. So I think that's probably the most significant learning. May not be all that surprising, but it's making sure that you are prepared and have resilient plans that can accommodate those aspects. I think we've learnt a lot, but I think the market has also learnt a lot about how to respond in those circumstances and what's reasonable and what's not within the New Zealand context. Many of the partners that we are dealing with have global reach. They link back to very large holding companies that have global capability and obligations. So making sure that there's an appreciation of the New Zealand context, making sure that we are looking after the things that we view and value as most important, and that we are talking to people in those organisations who are able to transact on behalf of the organisation, but also connect to what we're looking for within the New Zealand context. So I think speaking to the right parts of those organisations is a really important part of what we've learned.
Back to new question or same line?
New question. Tēnā koe ho, tēnā koutou, mō te haere mai. My question's a little bit up the chain, and it's relative to Te Tiriti o Waitangi. We're all aware that references to Te Tiriti o Waitangi and the principles were removed from the corrections bill this year and largely replaced with the principles of correction. So my question for you is, how do you see the principles of correction giving effect to Te Tiriti o Waitangi across the correction system, given in particular that one of your key aims is to reduce Māori overrepresentation and incarceration?
Sure. Well, I think I'd start by saying actually having the crystallising of one of our 3 organisational outcomes as specifically reducing the overrepresentation of Māori within the correction system is what maintains our focus on the vast majority of the things that we must get right, which is connecting to a person, understanding not just their needs, but what the support mechanisms around them might be to put them on a better path with brighter prospects, making sure that we're focused on those things, not just at the outset of their journey with us, but thinking about the foundations of participation that we need to work with them to build so that they leave us with those supports more established. And I think to ensure that we can get out of the way of those within communities who are in perhaps a better place to make those more integrated connections to the services and support that are going to resonate for them. But enabling that within our part of the puzzle is about creating more access, more purpose, and more focus around the approach we take. So that's probably first, the outcome up there, one of our primary outcomes for the organisation. I think secondly, the approach we have taken to our organisational strategy is a pretty fundamental part of who we are and what we're focused on. Hōkairangi was launched as our organisational strategy back in 2019. It had a 5-year term. That was until 2024. We as an organisation have, as we will get to speak about over the course of the next 3 hours, I hope, had to do a lot of thinking about what we have learnt through the first 5 years of Hōkairangi and what we still needed to do to ensure that we were being true to achieving the 4 outcomes of our organisation. And that's led us to maintain a focus on those 6 core po that make up the original Hōkairangi as describing for us as an organisation the how we should be thinking about the discharging of our obligations under the Corrections Act and our regulations. And I think those really do articulate the connection to our obligation to achieve that outcome of reducing the overrepresentation of Māori. So we are at the final stages of allowing that refreshed strategy to emerge for the organisation and for our other key partners. That will be launched. It will be available before the end of this calendar year. And I think that's a really important part of us maintaining that focus for those within the organisation, as well as those who actually are going to be so important to realising that reduction in overrepresentation into the future.
We'll go for further questions. Just note, we are in the performance reporting in Hōkairangi section now. So if we continue with Tākata and then start our questions with Hōkairangi and then maybe move on to performance reporting. Tākata, continue.
Okay. So given that you no longer have a legislative platform for ensuring that the performance of corrections is adhering to Te Tiriti o Waitangi, do you think that leaves your programs like Te Ara Whakamua and Hōkairangi and other Māori programs vulnerable
I actually don't, because we haven't removed anything from our legislative obligations. So this was to give specific focus originally to the impact of treatment. So again, we can either get into what we're doing about that in terms of ensuring the treatment and interventions and approaches to services we provide are focusing on the right needs and specific cohorts now, or we can come on to that later. But that's been the way in which we've approached our focus on delivering the right services to the needs of the people that we are caring for through both community and custody. So that's something that I do want us to be able to talk about. Optimising our services is a fundamental review of the services that are available for those in our care and under our management, and just making sure that we have used evidence to drive the needs of people and then the impact of the services we've got available. So that's a really important part of ultimately connecting to things that will make a difference. So might come on to that possibly.
Yeah. So you don't think that the removal of Te Tiriti out of the corrections?
There has been no removal. There's been no removal. There's been no removal
of programs. You don't think that
there's been no removal of Te Tiriti of Waitangi from the Corrections Act. We were talking about specifically adding in to our Corrections Act rather than removing anything.
So the future of the programs that are targeted at reducing the overrepresentation of Māori are fairly solid in your view?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Because we've got the outcome that informs what we have to focus on at a whole of performance level for the organisation, and we are using an evidence base, actually for the first time in quite a while, to assess what are our services, what is the evidence they are actually connected to achieving a shift in those outcomes. And we're then looking to focus all of our energies to better align those services to achieving those outcomes into the future. So that's the driver for us as an organisation, being more effective, evidence-based, and connecting to a performance framework.
Just lastly then on Hōkairangi, after 5 years of Hōkairangi, what's been the improvement in Māori over incarceration?
On the data, there hasn't been any. There hasn't been any in terms of what the wider system is effectively seeing come into the criminal justice system and some of the impacts that we then are required to pick up. So I think that's a really important point for us to acknowledge. What I would say though, for us as an organisation, Hōkairangi, I believe, has been a huge shift in the way in which we think about the people that we are caring for, the specific needs that they've got, the important change we need to make as an organisation, the cultural significance of those who are overrepresented in our custodial and community systems. And that shift has really, really made a difference. We've undertaken some research to ensure that we're not imagining that and that it has actually realised some real change. And we have established that
change in the staffing population, obviously not in the incarcerated population, in the staff population.
Correct. Yeah.
So how are you backing that change up by developing your staff in the right direction?
By basically highlighting the things that are going to make the biggest difference and making sure that those are visible and clear in our capability pathways. Maybe a really sort of tangible thing that we can point to, particularly for our core corrections officer staff, has been the addition of an elective into their capability pathway that specifically talks to cultural awareness and their ability to receive additional pay attached to that capability being achieved. I don't know whether
the uptake of that elective.
Yeah. So Rebecca Rebecca Powell is our Deputy Chief Executive, People and Capability.
Is it well subscribed to, Rebecca?
Rebecca, so just pop up to the microphone if you can't see the live stream.
4,601 eligibles have completed the elective learning, which represents 79% of our prison-based staff and 87% of our health services staff.
And is it sort of a program in isolation, or is it a phased out?
It's a core part of our overall capability for corrections officers. It is an elective, so it is. I'm
sort of talking about a phased out cultural development plan.
So just this week, actually, I've had our National Manager of Cultural Capability present her refresh framework in terms of cultural capability, looking at a structured approach to developing cultural capability across a kind of series of moving people from through different stages of competency across a range of areas. I'm really looking forward to us launching in the new year. It's a really structured approach, which really sets out across our different frontline workforces and also our enabling services what good looks like in terms of our people having good cultural competency. And that's both for people working in a Māori space, but also with for our Pacifica staff and with Pacifica people who are managing our prisons and wider intercultural capability.
I think that's good on that one. We've got subs from Cameron and then Francisco and then Tracy.
Mr. Lighthouse, we continue to hear that the treaty provisions are being taken away from the operating statute. But can you confirm that in that the 2004 legislation never had those treaty provisions? And you've been operating that act for the last 20 years, the only provisions that have been taken away were a draft bill that never progressed and never passed. If you can confirm that.
I can.
And also whether you've been able to uphold your obligations to Māori since 2004 under the Corrections Act that had, and I've word searched the statute here, zero reference to the Treaty of Waitangi.
I can confirm the first, and I would humbly acknowledge that we will always be striving to do more to uphold our obligations in that regard. So for me to boldly say that we have always achieved is probably overstating it. But I think for me, Hōkairangi, the 2018-2019 period was really important for us as an organisation because we had a lot of adjusting and reflecting to do to shift our focus, which I believe the first 5 years of Hōkairangi has really done. And I think this next period, and you'll hear hopefully quite a bit more of that now, the last couple of years has been about us organising ourselves to be really effective with an evidence base to ensure that we can demonstrate the impact and the shifts that we are making to be as effective as we can to achieve those three outcomes that our organisation is focused on.
Good. And if I can just apologise for calling you the wrong surname.
You can.
I actually asked Todd Stevenson. I said, is it Lighthouse? He said, it certainly is, and walked out.
Very good. Now,
That's okay. I've been called worse. Maybe I will be today.
I've got subs lined up from Francisco Hernandez or the SUP. So what we'll do is we'll take some more SUPs on this. I'll just note that we do have a section coming up on over-representation of Māori in the justice system.
Okay.
So if the next line of primaries can be around performance reporting, that would be good. So,
I'm hearing a lot of fantastic initiatives, in terms of providing equity to Māori. Has the recent circular on providing services on needs rather than race impacted or caused the review of those programs in any way?
Again, I would say the approach that we are taking for this review, the Optimising Our Services review, is just to make sure that we understand who we are caring for and managing across both community and custody. And so making sure that we are not making too much of an assumption about the critical needs of different cohorts of people, and we can address those specifically. At this stage, and Alice might want to talk a bit about this now, we are focused on some particular offence types as the key focus for us, but we have picked out two particular areas of focus on women and on young people. So that's been the real focus, but understanding the attributes of the people in our care and management is a pretty key part of us making sure the services we are making available are relevant to the people in our care and under our management.
So there's been no moves to kind of rethink the programs, for Māori or around Māori equity based on that cabinet circular?
Not specifically, because we were already in train with this program of work.
Yeah.
great, thank you.
Thank you. So just focusing on performance reporting, I see the figure 2. No, sorry, that's my figure 2. There's a budget the budget for reoffending is reduced appropriation versus the percentage of related performance measures achieved. Is quite a interesting graph insofar as there's not a huge amount of correlation. So can you just talk us through what first of all, what are the initiatives that are working? Specifically, we talked about the increasing the capability of corrections staff in terms of cultural awareness, but what are the actual initiatives that are working? And I also want to have a look at deaths in custody. So, I mean, you achieve some quite good scores, so to speak, insofar as your reporting.
Yeah.
But what you're reporting is not always that clear, particularly, and I know you're doing some work on this, when you look at rather than hours involved in rehabilitation, it's courses, it's things completed. So there's not always a lot of
100%.
alignment there. But if we could just focus on deaths in custody. So in 2023-24, there were 31 deaths in custody, which is an increase of 13. So that was a big jump. Of these deaths, 18 were assumed natural and 13 assumed unnatural. But when we go down to that audited measure on page 51, we get a pass of 88%, and I don't understand how that works because, and I may be looking at this incorrectly, but if you've got 13 assumed unnatural deaths, and generously we can take one away because there was an issue about it not that person not necessarily being in corrections custody, and there were 8 reports done out of 12. That's not 88%. So maybe you can't answer that right here, right now, because I've sort of sprung that on you. But can you get back to me, or can someone have a look at that over the course of this, just to see if that is correct? And again, I may be reading it wrong, but that was the first one I looked at, and it didn't feel right to me. So in terms of having confidence in reporting, if you could just tell me whether the text on page 51 and the table kind of add up. In relation to deaths in custody, do you have any information about ethnicity and about the difference between whether if there's age differences, ethnic differences? I mean, who's dying in your custody?
Yeah, it might be useful just to also sort of direct your attention to the on the same page, the suspected suicide and self-harm thematic, because I think that was a really important thematic report by the Inspectorate at the beginning of this year, looking longitudinally over a period of 2016 through 2021. And for us as an organisation, trying to get better insights and understanding about some of those causal factors was what led to that thematic report being commissioned. Because this is, I mean, let's be clear, we're talking about people losing their life, incredibly traumatic and impactful, not just for the family of the loved one involved, but clearly for all those staff who are involved in managing through this sort of tragic event. So for us as an organisation, every single one of these events really has impact, and the Inspectorate undertook a really in-depth study. There are some really significant findings. I mean, the 6 recommendations made by the Inspectorate were all accepted by us, and we are making some progress already in addressing some of the most immediate and pressing areas, 54 areas specifically for us to address. I think that might be a really important area for us to talk in a bit more detail around if you're interested. But I mean, I know Juanita from a DCE priority in terms of that holistic health and treatment perspective has been closely involved in this, can maybe talk about some of the immediate work that's done with her team, the health practitioners on site when an event like this goes on. But I know between Lee and Juanita, there is a lot of focus and work, and they have collectively committed to
So
all of those 6
I suppose what I'm trying to get at is that we need to have faith in the reporting of these things, because if we don't understand
100%.
how it of what's going on, and we are changing the nature of the prison population. We know that there's more and more remand prisoners. We know that the prison population's got to grow. Are you an organisation that's set to be able to handle that, having learned, so that these death rates don't just continue to go up? So that's the kind of thing I'm wanting some reassurance
that's awesome.
about.
And I think that was really what was driving us to commission that thematic report, to make sure that we were not ignorant of some of the main drivers that might be leading to increased levels of self-harm and suicide. And is there anything in that report that enables us to change some of the ways in which we are delivering services, change some of the training we've got available, and maybe change some of the assessment tools that we use to understand people's needs as they come into our system. But I might just pause there and just check to see whether or not
We do
want
then.
to talk to some of that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Deputy Chief Executive will need to Ryan for high order.
Morena.
Morning.
Just in terms of the comment that you made, Minister, around the annual report, without having it in front of me, I think what you're referring to is, sorry, is that better? I think what you're referring to is the timeliness of the inspectorate reports. So the 8 out of 12 of them, 8 out of 12 of the reports have met timeliness. Is that correct? And you're challenging the
The
percentage.
text seems to say that 8 out of 12 or 8 out of 13 have met timeliness, but you give yourself 88%, which is a pass rate, which would therefore be a fail rate if the text is right or the tape is wrong.
So just in terms of your other question, in the last financial year, out of the 12 suspected suicides, I don't have the specific data in front of me, but it was the first year in some time where the number of Māori who passed due to suspected suicide was about the same as the number of Māori in the population in prison. Other years it's tended to be a little lower, so we have seen an increase in rates of suspected suicides for Māori. Some of the other things which came through in the thematic review in terms of our understanding is we tend to have more people committing suicide in our remand context. Sometimes that tends to be earlier on when they have come in into our context from the communities. We know that probably quite a high proportion of them have come in with charges for family violence and sexual violence, and we know that pain is often correlated to unmanaged pain. So the thematic reviews of the inspectorate, the ones that we've done ourselves, predating that within the Health and Pai Order Service, have provided us with some insights about really where to focus some of our attention and efforts. So in terms of a response to some of those things, some of the immediate things we have in train is our health service, and our chief nurse is leading some work on how we can be better responsive to individuals' reports and descriptions of pain, and how we're managing that and responding to that via our nursing and medical context, given we know that appears to be a correlate in our context.
Do you have the requisite resources to do this work?
Yes, I've had no indication from our chief nurse that there is an issue with that, and it is something they are prioritising based on the inspectorate's report. I can't give you a timeline on that, but it is something that's absolutely in train. In terms of other things, I'd say is in the last 12 months, we have stood up a principal advisor suicide prevention. So as an organisation, we're acknowledging this is an issue based on what Jeremy has said, that we want to ensure that we're doing everything we can for everyone to leave prison that should be leaving prison and going safely back into the community. And they've got a work program with a number of current actions. We're working on the refurbishment of our intensive support units. So these are the units across many of our prison sites where we accommodate people who are at a higher risk of suicide. So this is about some of the furnishings in there, some of the aspects which we want to make more therapeutic and context for people who are in higher distress. We are also developing, or we've just finalised a mental health operations manual for the 10 mental health teams that we have internally across our organisation. So that's grown in the last probably 5 years from having 3 internal teams to now having 10. This is us acknowledging the concerns that we have about the overrepresentation of people coming into prisons with mental health issues and being better able to respond to those in real times. We are also doing a piece of work that's been ongoing for some years about addressing ligature points within our prison context. So we've got an infrastructure team that is identifying where that there may be vulnerabilities to that, particularly where we're housing people that are more vulnerable and responding to those. And we're providing staff with pre-recorded training on the suicide screening tool that we use and across the estate, but also with our custody officers coming through their initial training. We've started to introduce over the last 12 months a mental health 101, so starting to increase their base level of expertise so they've got a greater sense of what they might need to be looking for and understanding.
So along with vulnerabilities being associated with being on remand, what about double bunking, and is there any geographical patterns in the data?
I don't have the specific data in front of me around geographical patterns. I think certainly at some of our large prisons, such as Mount Eden, which tends to be a remand site, I would say that there is likely we would see a greater likelihood.
Remand prisons,
yes,
Māori.
double bunking. Could I say it's a protective factor? I couldn't, but what we do find is it's more likely that when someone takes their life, our data is telling us they are in a single cell, not a double bunked cell. That's not exclusive, but it's overwhelmingly the case that those who are taking their lives are actually in a cell by themselves. So it does give us pause to think about when might someone sharing a cell be a protective factor for particular individuals on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you.
Okay, we
Tracy,
now
can I just
one second, Jerry. We now moved into the next topic. So what we'll do is we'll continue this line of questioning just on this one, and we'll revisit the performance reporting at the end under general. But I'll let Jeremy.
It was just the opportunity maybe to answer that specific question about can we have confidence in the audited measure? And I've just made sure I was reading page 51 clearly and correctly. So obviously not every unnatural death occurs within a time frame in the reporting year that will necessarily enable the completion of the report from a timeliness perspective. So of the 13, only 8 were identified as being relevant for the time period. The balancing 5 would fall outside of the annual period. Therefore, 8 is the right number. And then of the 8, only 1 didn't meet the timeliness, which then gets you to the 88%. Does that make sense? I mean, if I am incorrectly reading this, we will refer
But for
that back to the
future,
committee.
that's not a great way to measure that.
I have definitely made a note and acknowledge that we could be clearer.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any subs on this line of questioning? We'll go one from Rem and then I had one from Duncan as well.
I mean, mine's been answered.
Here we go. Okay, Rem.
Just a quick one, please. It might require you. Thank you. In the past year, with those 12 or 13 that you said, was there any indication that any of them were suicidal? Was there any indication with strong?
You mean
indication?
presenting attributes as they came into our system that they were
I
suicidal?
know that they, on a base level, a lot of them have a lot of vulnerabilities. But from your reporting and analysis, did any of them present suicidal thoughts clearly to staff that you know of?
I would have to go back and have a look at it as within 24 hours of someone passing a suspected suicide, we do ask the team to provide us with the best information that they have on how that person was presenting. So I couldn't hand on heart fairly respond to your question. I would say there tends to be a mixture. There are people that come into our prison where we screen people as they're coming through our doors in terms of for suicide. That's both done by custody and health, so that's undertaken twice. If we have concerns about someone's vulnerability, they are put into the intensive intervention support units I referred to in the past. Some people will come in and there are no indications. Other people will come in and there is a history of suicidality and suicide risk, but it's not currently presenting. Others may come in with more of an acute response, but I can provide you with that information.
What I'm interested particularly is those that didn't show any signs, the numbers, please, if you don't mind.
Yep.
Thank you.
Happy to provide those.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Rema. Okay, we're now in the section on over-representation of Māori in the justice system. I've got the first question from Paolo Garcia, and then we'll go to Taka Groups.
Good morning. Thank you for being here with us today. It's very encouraging to hear about the progress that you have with the Hokai Rangi strategy, also with the vulnerability of people with mental health issues. My question has to do with gender matters. What surrounds the initiatives around gender and what early evaluations you may have in respect of strategies that deal with gender and whether this can be effectively assessed under the Hokai Rangi strategy as well.
Specifically in relation to gender?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes is the answer. We have a specific strategy for women, and I might ask Kim Grierson, our Deputy Commissioner for our three women's network prisons, to come and give you a bit more of the detail around that particular strategy, what its focus has been on, what we've been able to achieve, particularly in that prison environment. And I think it will speak to both our appreciation of the gender responsive knowledge that our practitioners need to have to be effective in that space, as well as thinking about some of the services that we are making available to those women in a prison context. I think we can probably talk to both the strategic intent and the direction, and then staff capability and treatment. Maybe if we can kind of work it in that way. Kim?
Thank you, Jeremy, and kia ora panel. Nice to meet you. So specifically, we have a strategy called Wahine Arere Ana Kei Te Paiho, as Jeremy has alluded to. The inaugural strategy was launched in 2017 and went through to 2021. In 2021, we did a refresh of that through to 2025, and Arere Ana Kei Te Paiho is our roadmap for how we achieve hokairangi for women. Next year, we'll be looking at what a refresh of that looks like, and in line with optimising our services, our plan for how we continue that gender responsive approach across the organisation. At the beginning of this year, in April, through Te Ara Whakamua, we stood up a continued focus on working with women, and I am in the privileged position of being kaitiaki of that role as the Deputy Commissioner for Women's Prisons. So what that meant was lifting the 3 women's sites that we had within the broader custodial environment and connecting them with our women's strategic team to form a connected, cohesive team that will provide consistency across each of those prison environments. Some of the achievements that we've seen to date through the women's strategy have included an increased understanding and awareness of the importance of working in a gender and culturally responsive, trauma-informed way. We've also seen the continuation of our core programs, taking that gender and culturally responsive approach. And some examples of those include Kōwhiritanga, which is one of our medium intensity programs, Kia Rite, which is a skills-based program for women coming into our custodial environment for the first time, and there's a few others that I can go into more detail with. The importance of Arere Ana Kei Te Paiho is it's owned organisationally wide. So whilst we have a specific focus, particularly in that custodial environment for all of the right reasons, we also have the departmental approach to how we make sure that that goes across policy, process, infrastructure, pai ora, community pathways and partnerships, etc. So it's a collective effort on responding to those specific needs for women coming into our care and management.
Thank you. Thank you.
But I've got a sum on that line. We visited the therapeutic unit at Christchurch Women's. Is there any evaluation or research that has been done in the past year or will be done about outcomes for women in that unit compared to some of the other facilities or units that you run? Good question.
I might actually hand over to our expert in that space when it comes to the therapeutic units around evaluations. My apologies.
I think, Chair, the quick answer is not yet, because I think when we went there, it was 3 months in. It is definitely a high priority for us to make sure that we are seeing the impact of that therapeutic environment for the women, and understanding what is different. Because we heard, I think, when we were there, the real change and impact for the women of seeing custodial staff and treatment staff, be they program facilitators, psychologists and others, coming together and collectively owning the operational day, rather than what perhaps more traditionally happens, where treatment staff deliver a program and then depart the units and custodial staff endure. And the women's opportunity to continue to test what they are learning in every interaction in the entirety of that environment has seemed to be, not research, but from what we heard, the really important shift. So we're really, really keen to understand that and see the impact it ultimately has on reducing reoffending, but that unfortunately will be, a few years away before we can start to see the outcomes show.
A couple more 3-hour hearings to go.
Yeah.
We'll go Tracy and then Takata.
So just quickly something on that. Do you have any information about the relative cost of providing those therapeutic communities versus?
We can certainly provide that.
Yeah, because
be wrong of me to
feels like it would be sort of an intensive.
It is. And I think again, this is picking up themes that are really relevant for the optimising our services discussion, which is where do we place our effort and resources, and how do we prioritise the impact we think we can have with different cohorts. So intensification of service, we know makes a real difference. Where do we want to make sure we're having that difference, understanding we've got very finite resources? So optimising our services is very much disciplining us to think about that and the impacts we feel we need to have.
Yeah. Sorry, Chair, I know that Takata needs to go. Do you want to take my question? I'll come back.
Oh, no, it's.
Okay. Thank you.
Is this on the same line or
Yes,
new
yeah.
line? Yep.
Same line. So looking at the, two things, the Kaupapa Māori Services for Waihinei funding, which I know was budget 2021, 2022, it was going to phase down, which it certainly has. So there was nothing in that prompted that money not to start reducing, because it's been running at, it's less than halved now as of budget. There's no new funding in budget 2024 to keep that program going at the same rate. I understand it was always set to phase down. Yeah. Was there no budget bid, or did the minister not agree that should retain its funding?
No, I'm not sure that I'm 100% clear what service we're talking about. Do you know what that relates to?
I'm wondering, and just wanting to confirm, is that the Te Manawa pathway program you're talking about?
Yeah.
Pathway, is that Christchurch?
The Māori pathway.
Yes,
right.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we do have enduring funding for certain components. There is a degree of complexity about all of the many aspects that made up Māori Pathways funding.
Mm-hmm.
There was a large proportion of it that went to uplift the rates of pay for service providers right at the outset of Māori Pathways. So I think the key message for us to give as an organisation is what we are looking to do is identify the things of greatest promise that came out of Māori Pathways and ensure that those things are protected and can be taken into our core functional areas and ensure that they can endure. And again, we might be able to talk about that a little more, but we have found, I think, through the Māori Pathways work, that setting up programs of work and doing them specifically to the side of our core functions was very good in generating the ideas, very good at having real focus, but not as effective as really shifting the core functions of our operations.
So you're intending to be able to do that. You just haven't 100%. Done the evaluative work, because 100%. Considering the high incarceration rate of Māori women in particular, it just seemed counterintuitive to me 100%. That it wasn't a priority.
No, I think hopefully without that kind of counterintuitive data, the elevation of a women's prison network, the focus on making sure that we are culturally responsive to the needs of the women who are in our care, and then making sure our functional focus is treating those with greatest need in that context, where intensive treatment can have greatest impact, and making sure we're using resources available to us in the most effective way. That's the
So will you be able to absorb, will that be business as usual in terms of baseline, 100%. Or will you need to go back next year for budget bids?
That is our core work. So that's baseline. So making sure our functions focus on the needs of the people in our care and we're effective in the services we're delivering is our mode.
Yeah. And I just wanted to ask one quick question. You said earlier on about, in relation to Māori in prison, that as part of the wider system, you kind of get what you get to work with. And I know that the minister has said that before, and I just want to remind everybody that with the recidivism rates as high as they are, and the revolution of people through the system, you are as responsible for who lands on your doorstep as anybody else. So what programs specifically are working well for Māori, given that the rate of Māori incarceration proportionately isn't coming down and hasn't for a long time?
Yeah, I don't know, Alice, whether you want to start getting into that, because that's a core part of one of our services.
I would. Thanks, Jeremy, and Morena Koto. We have an evidence base, a long-run evidence base around what works. Like that. We also have RQ on specific programs, which if you wanted to, we could dig into. But what is really hard for us to do, well, what we really need to do is understand how the system as a whole is getting the best bang for buck, that everything that we're invested in is delivering the outcomes toward our core purpose. And so at the start of this year, actually toward the end of last year now, stood up a program of work called Optimising Our Services, which was acknowledging the significant shifts in the population that we have with us, both in custody and in community. In particular, thinking about the rates of people on remand. 2015, 20% of the prison population on remand, forecast by 2029 to be over 50%. I mean, that's really stark for us. The evidence base that's designed around what works and our approaches that support making sure that we're doing the things that are most effective for people in our care has evolved over time, has evolved from an assumption of a different prison population that is far more static, less churn, and spending more time on sentence as opposed to spending a lot of time on remand. And so we realise that we can't just keep on trying to tidy up the programs that we can deliver, because it's no point in having a great supply side if you can't connect it to the demand side that we actually have with us, because of all the obvious system constraints. And then you have a global pandemic like COVID that puts even more pressure on that system. And you'll see there was a tail off, as you would expect, when you're not connecting the treatment to the people who need it. And so optimising our services is about taking that step back and understanding how we can best deliver the right services to the right people at the right time. To do that, we have taken a really in-depth look and built a data model that integrates many databases to understand the populations that we have with us. We've segmented that into 5 custodial cohorts. We've looked at community as well, so we've got a specific community cohort. And we've taken a specific slice of those to look at women and people on remand. Women and youth. Taking those cohorts, we've worked with all of our experts to understand, ideally, assuming, and it never is, a linear pathway of care through our site, what would be the inputs that you would put in to ensure that everyone, regardless of what cohort they fall into, gets to leave corrections better and with brighter prospects. And so we've got, these imagined pathways. What we've used with those pathways of care, what we've done with those pathways of care is to understand and assess over 150 programs and services about what is going to be the most effective inputs into those pathways. We've assessed those against criteria such as historic utilisation, available evidence around efficacy, the degree to which they're Māori-centred or tailored specifically for Māori. And we've used all of that information to determine if we were to declutter and optimise our system, what would be the most impactful? What would we retain? And so we're at the end of this, and so that's the first thing. Then looking at our populations, we've not only understood the likely volumes, we've also understood the demand in each part of that pathway. So getting ready, so treatment readiness, offence focus, rehabilitation, and hence of reintegration to support people to leave us sustainably and reducing reoffending.
Yeah, and we will have a chance to do that further in the next section.
So that's about right-sizing the supply side to meet the demand. And so we're really confident that we now know, as best as the evidence and our data that we've been able to capture can tell us, what are the things that works, where do they need to be, and who do they need to be targeting. And so I think that enables us to get a really better appreciation for what good performance looks like for our system, and not to imagine.
Right. So there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
But one thing off the top of my head, the fact that the remand numbers are so high has forced you to really stand back and reconsider an awful lot.
Yeah.
What has cost saving and cuts in other sectors or other parts of the justice system, like courts, like justice, various other things, that's having an impact on your operations. Is that something? How are we going to get these remand numbers down? There must be a way to do that.
Is that? I might hand to Lee in terms of knowledge of the wider system coming out of the high impact innovation area, but one of the things that the justice sector as a whole has absolutely committed to is improving timely access to justice. That is seen as
I feel like I've been hearing that for a long time.
Of course you have. I've been in the criminal justice for 14 years, and it has been a constant challenge. And you might say I've got rocks in my head or something, but I firmly believe at the moment that we are really focused on the right conversation, on the things that will make the biggest difference, what's coming in to the criminal justice system, the efficiency of the court part of the criminal justice system. And then to your point, we've got a clear obligation in the outcomes from that criminal justice process where it hits either a community sentence, order or custodial term. We've got a critical part to play, but all of those things have to work with to Alice's point, the people who are coming into the system. And for us as a sector, making sure we've got absolute line of sight of that. And we're not imagining that as three primary agencies, police, courts and corrections, we're doing it alone. We're sitting down with the judiciary, appropriate separation, but talking about the things we are doing together, at least in terms of visibility of each other's activities, and then watching the results that are transpiring. And in Auckland, we've done quite a bit of work in the court environment there to understand the things that do start to make a difference. And we are starting. They are small green shoots, but they are starting to demonstrate that we are getting better results in that space.
So when I look at your cost saving exercise where you repurposed essentially a lot of back office staff, it did seem to be those coordinating roles. I know that they were vacant and we can talk about that afterwards, but where you sought to save money, it seemed to be in those working between agency roles. Is that fair, or do you still have capacity to still do all of that?
I think how I would, there will inevitably have been a reduction in overall capacity in our organisation across the sector. How I am viewing the decisions we have made, and I think it stands to scrutiny, is that we have effectively said, as I have described from Māori Pathways, programs to the side that are not connected to the core functions of each of our organisations have less likelihood to endure and really change the performance of the core services. So actually focusing on reducing the resources put into separate specialist programs, getting functions in their functional planning to focus on the things that are of greatest importance and get that resource focused in the work they do every day, in the things that will make the biggest difference, has been the approach we've taken. So my belief is we are decluttering the conflation of program activity and core functions, and people saying, well, what's all that stuff and what do you want me to we would like key practitioners whose job it is to do these things to focus on working in different ways so that they can actually start to shift the performance of the system. So that's how we're seeing that.
How will you judge if that works?
I think the performance reporting around timely access to justice is a really good kind of point of performance assessment. So seeing how we are managing with the volumes coming into the system and whether or not we're then seeing a more timely performance of the court process, that's a really good place for us to be looking over the course of the next few years.
We are
fewer deaths and fewer
for us
proportion of Māori in prison.
For us, 100%.
Right, so we now are into the rehabilitation and reintegration section, but given that I think Taka, you might need to head off. Do you have any further questions on
overrepresentation?
I've got a couple of
things to just goes around a couple of places. Yep, so all good. Okay, so I'm just going to focus this back on the wahine Māori in prison, right? And it would be remiss of me not to bring this up for yourself, Chief Executive of Corrections, everyone in this room, people responsible for it, that Māori women are the most highly incarcerated Indigenous cohort in the world. That's a great success for colonisation, but it is an indictment on our society, our structure, our government, the lot. When Moana Jackson first started investigating this stuff in 1986, that percentage was 6%. So this is no laughing matter. This is no laughing matter at all. So it's great to hear that there are many Māori programs underway and that Wahine Erere Ki Te Pai Hou is a program. I'm not sure how long it's been going. But it's all connected into Hōkairangi, into Arawhakamua, and into every other Māori initiative you have going on, except no change has happened. Now, there comes a point in any sort of rationalisation of organisation and achieving outcomes where you have to get serious. How many Māori are on your senior leadership team? How much of your funding goes into the Māori programs that might help reduce the 67% incarceration rate of Māori women down to their respective population percentage rate? So, you know, you have to get blunt.
Yeah.
We have to be blunt. This has gone on for far too long, and it is a disservice to the whole country. So, but like I say, there have been some great things mentioned. You've got a robust cultural development plan coming. Whanonga here tells me that you've got all of the data you could ever need. You have said you firmly believe that at the moment you are positioned the best to make an impact. So, given Hokairangi has had 5 years to bed in, hasn't reduced any downward movement for Māori incarceration, Māori women's incarceration remains at 67%, highest in the world for an Indigenous population. What are the targets you are going to set for your 10,000 staff in the next 5-year iteration of Hokairangi, should it get one? What are the reduction targets you are going to set for your staff to bring Māori women's incarceration rates down first, and then the general Māori incarceration rates down?
Yeah. Great articulation of one of those really, really critical problems that we have a clear part to play in. And your colleague on the committee has also recognised that the reducing of reoffending is our part of the puzzle in terms of the impact of that incarceration rate. We are not solely responsible for that incarceration rate. Our responsibility is making sure that the things that we are doing with our partners are having the biggest impact for those in our care. I wonder, I don't have a target number for you today. So that is a thing that I have taken clear accountability for in thinking about what the next plan. You heard from Kim, the strategy completes at the end of next year. You are right in saying it's been running since 2017. So what actually is changing in our space? We now have optimising our services as giving us a clear focus from an evidence basis to the things that we can contribute, and a performance framework that's driving much greater levels of accountability and transparency about the things that are working. I believe that as we start to mature that performance framework and the optimising our services approach, we'll be in a much better position to be able to articulate what is a sensible target for the next period against interventions that we have an evidence base to put something against. The thing I suppose I really want to put out here is that we as an organisation cannot solve this on our own. We have made a really significant move in the last few years that Hokairangi has really encouraged for us of meeting some of our absolute obligations from a Te Tiriti perspective in terms of recognising our partners, understanding that some of our partners are aligned in terms of their mission, their ambition, their strategy, and they want to walk alongside us, as well as many other public service organisations, to actually make a difference for their people. And so we have many fledgling examples of real change where they are, as our partners, identifying opportunity for them to take the flex and the connection function for ensuring that people who leave us have been prepared, are connected, have those foundations for participation. And I just wonder, so that you're not listening to me, but maybe listening to someone else who was in the room when this was described, I just ask Herewini Koha, our DC Māori, to just talk briefly about a recent conversation with Ngāti Toa around a focus on exactly what you're talking about. They have a priority. They, as an iwi, have said almost exactly what you have said, and they want to contribute. They want to help. They want to participate, and they're effectively saying, can you move the barriers out of our way so that we can have impact? So I just wonder whether we just give a bit of a frame for that, because I think we've got to get into that mode more and more, but recognise we can only do that with partners who have aligned interest and capacity to involve themselves. I'm not being so presumptuous to say we can just apply it to everyone, but where that partnership exists, let's use it and see what results, improved results can be achieved. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe. Kia koe, the member, to the chair and to the committee, tēnā koe. you touched on or anchor us back to one of the most shocking kind of data sets we have, which is the entrenched level of wahine Māori imprisonment within our system. We've been challenged in many of the discussions we've had, including our most recent one with mana whenua here in Pupokotika, about the very issue of wahine Māori within our system, the appallingly high disproportionate rates of that incarceration, and getting serious about partnering really well, really practically with mana whenua in this rohe and across the 3 sites where our Women's Prison Network operates. So we already have to acknowledge that there is significantly more dislocation experienced by wahine and wahine Māori than the wider estate. And so therefore having really discerning, really committed mana whenua partners across those 3 localities is absolutely vital for us. So they are all in. Their program leads want to work in this context with our team at Arohata to do 2 really pivotal things, irrespective of the program dressing that these contributions come in. They want to focus in on the reality that for wahine, the 67% of our wahine that are of iwi, that are Māori, that who they are culturally matters. So yes to gender, yes to the trauma, that also needs to form part of the wider rehabilitative pathway and reintegration pathway, but culture counts. And mana whenua and other smart Māori partners are better positioned to work with us. We'll make sure our frontline has complementary capability, but we're not going to pretend to be better at Māori connection than Māori people are with our own people. And that second point, the second pillar that our Māori partners can bring, and us, our challenge is to give them the headroom, is knowing that those connections matter. That for wahine Māori and other people managed within our services, that the sense of optimism they can have, knowing that there are whānau or others outside the wire who are committed to their success, will go a long way to stabilising and helping them stay the course of their rehabilitation. And we're getting that in the really fruitful corridor we've had with local partners as we look forward to the future for Hokairangi and the department, both here and Horapa ki te motu.
Any subs or anything further on that?
Yes.
Yes. What we're going to do is we're going to run this part through to the break, and then we'll rebuild the rehab section into the other matters.
What time is the
break? At 10:15. So Rima,
Okay,
there's 6
right.
minutes left.
Thank you. Just supplementary. And so you may want to remain for this. On page 40 of the annual report, there's a comment made that that overrepresentation of Māori is a significant and complex issue. What, through your lens, as a department, and you've touched on things right now, but I found it curious, that comment that was made in the report, and also in light of what you've just said, Jeremy, that we as an organisation cannot solve this on our own. But when you say that it is significant, absolutely, and complex issue, can you define your view of the complexities? I know what other people's views are, but your views as an organisation of the complexities that make up this significant issue.
Wow. That's,
and I know it's a long conversation.
that is a very significant question. My appreciating time, my probably clumsy short answer to that is every person brings so much of what they've experienced, not their own life experience, but those of their forebears, into how they transact their life. And none more so than for Māori within the New Zealand context. And that, I think, is what we are wanting to be clear that we appreciate, so that we do not imagine that it is a simple problem to solve with one answer, with one response. And to Hedawini's point, for me to be corrected by him, that we should not be assuming that we as an organisation are best placed to determine what's best for the Māori connection back to place that might then create much better long-term foundations for more positive participation in society. And so enabling us to let that sit with us as an organisation so that we are then examining and exploring what those connections need to be and how those services being able to be delivered by others with better capability and better capacity sometimes is a really important part of what we need to appreciate as an organisation. Because without that acknowledgement, I think it is quite easy for us otherwise to assume that we as an organisation alone can solve for it. And I just truly believe that that's not the case. We've got to have others walking alongside us and connecting all of those things that are so critically important for anyone to have a fruitful and stable and progressive life forward. It cannot be delivered by us alone.
I remember when I first met you when we visited one of the prisons.
Auckland Women's.
And this was the bulk of the korero you and I had as we were walking around that large facility. And that's stuck in my mind. And I appreciate that the lens with which you acknowledge that it's a significant issue, but it's something that your organisation can't solve alone.
Okay, thank you. Any further subs on this line? Otherwise, what we'll do is I'll suggest we break slightly early for...
one last one then. I appreciate and understand that it's not solely corrections' responsibility to fix the whole thing. But I also appreciate and understand that you are in charge of a significant workforce, of a significant resource, and you have significant legislative, policy, etc., tools at your disposal. So do you just think that perhaps a senior leadership team that is representative of the incarcerated crew might be a good idea? Like having 50% Māori on your senior leadership team. You have a 10,000 person cohort to upskill before you might see a decent push in or a permeation of the thinking and practices and understanding that my whanaunga here talks about. The mana whenua will provide, and Aotearoa, they can provide it, but this is also your responsibility to provide.
100%.
So it's a big job to raise that capacity in 10,000 people.
Big job.
So my question to you is, do you think that the composition of your workforce from the senior leadership all the way down to the people on the ground would give you a better opportunity at actually addressing your part in the situation, in the 67% of Māori women incarcerated? Do you think that that's something that corrections should be actively thinking about?
We are, and it is a part of the puzzle, no question. It is a part of the puzzle. It's not the only answer, because I also believe that getting the best people focused on all of the critical parts of our organisation to align and perform the best it can is another fundamental responsibility that I've got. So that's what I believe I've got at the moment. I've got a team who are actually three, can I say, define themselves as Māori. So we do have expertise across the executive who have brought that into the mix, but my colleagues who are not Māori are 100% committed to Hōkairangi as the strategy, the purpose of the strategy, driving the kind of why does it matter, that over-representation of Māori as one of our key deliverable outcomes. And I think diverse views with the competencies of skills and expertise I've got around that table, and the ability for everyone to speak, be heard, for constructive conflict, tension, discussions to be the mode that we operate in, so that we then commit to the thing that's going to help us drive towards our vision, is actually probably the most important thing for our organisation. But it's a component. It's a component, of course.
So you're in charge of the composition of that group.
We have to wrap it up very quickly. We're on the break.
Okay, given that you're in charge of the composition of that group, do you have confidence that that group can deliver tangible reductions in the Māori incarceration rate over the next tranche of Hōkairangi?
Alone as an organisation, not material ones. We have to be viewed as part of the system. I believe if you just look at us and how we're performing, the reduction in reoffending in that space, yes, I do think we can make a difference. The way in which that will show up, as you will know from the recidivism index and the recidivism quotient, is something that is 2.5 years post someone's release. So the timing of when that's showing up is always the challenge.
Do the three interested justice parties have conversations at this level?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, folks. We are going to move to a break. I won't eat into the further hearing time, so the break will be slightly shorter. Can everyone come back and ready to go at 10:30? And I'll just note that in terms of the time remaining,
Thank you.
government has 54 minutes and opposition 36. Okay.
Anyway, I corrected myself. Sorry, I said,
It's all right.
I said I am somewhere.
It's okay. Jeremy and I agreed to put you on probation.
Sorry.
You're on
I just
probation.
felt I had to share with.
Yeah, he's throwing me under the bus.
You're on probation.
There
Community
was-
service.
was
I've been
decent collegial
reliably
kind of.
informed, though.
Yeah.
It might be the one thing that gets me in the paper after 12 months of trying.
Okay.
Who else would like their names screwed up?
At least you got half the name right. I walked in and called Lee Neal, which was probably
Oh.
great. He's a very good looking man, Neil Beale.
No.
To offend. Not streaming out. Wow.
Yeah, I left it.
Behind the scenes.
I swear you said the right thing, but I can't remember. Are they yours?
Oh,
I found them on the floor.
so what's the difference between
Thought maybe they were yours.
saying?
No?
I'll take it because that's really good. So yeah,
Well, someone, yeah, there's
we've got time. Do you want to let me know?
Whoops, I wouldn't have
Is
been.
that good to go?
Oh, would Nancy have dropped it? Of course.
Okay, I think we're back. We've just got to make sure the live stream's up though. We'll change this time. Hang on. So we're now going to move on to a section on prison population changes and infrastructure. We've got about 30 minutes for this section. So what I'll do is I'll open up to members to start first question from Tracy McClellan.
Thank you. Prison population changes and infrastructure. So we've talked a little bit about the difference that the proportion of remand prisoners has affected corrections operations to the point where you've had to step back, rethink a whole suite of things, how a whole suite of things work. So how has the increase in remand numbers affected prison infrastructure and therefore safety, given that most prisons are old and have been designed for a sort of a remand population of around about 15%? How have you had to cope with the change of that proportionality?
I might thank you. I might start with, I suppose, a reflection of how we sort of think about capacity, both from an infrastructure as well as a staffing perspective. So, as you rightly say, in our infrastructure space, if I turn to that capacity first, we have a combination of low security accommodation, minimum security accommodation, high security accommodation, and maximum security accommodation. We actually have across our network a mix of aged and ageing facilities, but we have actually maintained a reasonable investment in new infrastructure, probably from the mid-2000s. So I don't want to portray that we are completely lacking in infrastructure investment. As we have matured and learnt over the course of the last 10 years about being better at planning and not being as surprised by significant changes in the trajectory of the prison population, we've been on a particular planned approach to have a long-term view of what our prison network should look like, how to build some resilience into that network to make sure that we are thinking about capacity and quality when we think about that network into the future. And so that culminated ultimately in us presenting a long-term network configuration plan to Cabinet just earlier this year. That focused on two primary areas of our infrastructure. The need and the growing need for a high security part of our network. That in part is informed by your point on the remand population, because we know often the least about those people. They are the less settled and stable, and therefore have, as I said in my opening remarks, greater propensity to violence and erratic behaviour. So high security has been a real focus in that long-term network configuration plan, and we have set out where we would see the opportunity to improve the quality of that high security in key locations, as well as take that opportunity of improving quality to add more capacity in those locations. The other part of our capacity question is then low security. We do have significant low security accommodation, and I would reflect that the quality of that accommodation is often not great because it's hut accommodation. It's lower security. The resilience of that infrastructure is lower, and therefore we have maintained in that hut environment quite old assets. The approach we're taking to the low security is over the 20 years, making sure that we're progressively improving those hut units in a way that is sustainable for maintaining the use of those aspects of our environment. So it's less likely to be big investment cases, large new developments, and much more taking the opportunity to improve, either replace or restore a hut unit on a hut by hut basis. So the high security, I would say, is probably the sort of the bigger focus. And for us right now, you've already referred to it. Waikiria is a really critical part of our network in delivering that higher quality, more resilient and improved capacity answer. We are close to concluding the construction of the first 596 places, the 500 sort of normal high security places, and the 96 places dedicated for mental health purposes. That site always envisaged the opportunity for expansion. The infrastructure that was laid had the capacity to enable more expansion. And so the further 841 places is our next tranche, which we are, as you acknowledged, working through negotiating the achievement of. But earthworks in the summer season this year are underway, and the design work is well progressed. And we're not having to reinvent the designs. A really important part of our thinking is to make sure we've got standardized designs, so they're not constantly reinventing the wheel. We're, of course, refining and tuning and learning, but we're not wasting time or imagining we can get it hugely different and better by doing that again. Christchurch is the sort of next location we've identified in that long-term network configuration plan. And I think some of you at this committee saw at Christchurch Men's Prison the unit that's now no longer used, understood the kind of connection with the Waikiria top jail and some of the similarities and why that's no longer in use, and why focusing our efforts in that particular locality for the next place for high security is so important. And then we've got some other places across our network. So high security is a real significant thing.
I'll let
I've got to stop first though. So talking about that reconfiguration network, those projections that were taken to Cabinet at the beginning of the year clearly showed that best case scenario, we run out of capacity at worst case scenario, June next year, we start running out of beds for the proposed increase in prison numbers. And I think it's end of 2027, best case scenario. That's assuming that Waikiria goes through its operationalisation, whatever it is.
Waikiria is critical to.
So it's absolutely critical. So there was also some information about the projected prison number increases due to the government's 4 specific policies. They're redacted. I can't see what they are, but I'm going to say gang patches, section 27, sentencing and 3 strikes, projecting an increase in prison numbers. Is that reconfiguration that went to Cabinet earlier in the year, are you confident in that? And how are you confident that we're not going to start running out June next year? Because where are we going to put these prisoners if we do?
Yeah, and I'll no doubt refer to Lee on this as well, but just to give you the frame in that respect, I think what you're rightly focusing on is the period post our first part of Waikiria coming online. and the noted pressure of increased population that we will experience between middle of 2025, when Waikiria is expected to be available, and then when the expansion of Waikiria is expected to be operational at the beginning of 2029. So that period is a really critical period for us. What we have got is a clear program of work that is acknowledging that we've got sites with capacity that needs to be brought online, and we've done a significant amount of that already this year, brought additional capacity that was out of use into use.
Does that involve having to negotiate, say, with Cairns to make sure that you can increase the number of beds that are operational in all of those sites?
Of course, yeah. Whenever we are anything operational in terms of the approach we are taking, the kind of nature of the operational requirements, we would always be engaging with both, all of our union partners.
So why aren't those beds available now? Are they because they're part of that group of poor quality beds, or it's just a negotiated level of staffing? If a facility has 100 beds and you agree that only 90 of them are operational, but you've got 10 up your sleeve. I know you have to have a buffer.
Yeah.
So
it isn't any of those things, actually. It's effectively us having in our network some facilities that have been taken out of use because we had a reduction in the prison population, and those facilities will and have had significant remediation to ensure they're safe to use. Some we have done, and therefore working through both the safety of the infrastructure, the fit for purpose nature of the infrastructure, and the necessary staffing required to ensure that it can be operated safely, makes that kind of whole in terms of now this is capacity we can use. There is in the future, particularly post June of next year, more capacity that we know we will need to bring in to bridge the gap between Waikiria 1 and Waikiria 2 coming online. Those are probably slightly longer term pieces of work to ensure the assets are at a standard that we're comfortable with.
So Waikiria 2, if I can just interrupt you, so Waikiria 2 is therefore completely critical. It'll be a PPP with a similar arrangement to Waikiria 1 extension.
Not yet determined,
in a relatively isolated place that's going to be difficult to staff. Have you looked at how operational it is going to be?
How viable to staff?
Yeah, it's essentially a very big prison in a relatively remote area. So it's considering how important it's going to be to prevent that in a short period of time, from June next year until it comes online. You must
in
be
early
sweating it a bit.
2029.
Yeah.
Hopefully that does give us a decent amount of time to continue the incredible work that the recruitment staff have achieved at Waikiria. Again, I'll maybe ask Rebecca to come and talk to that, because with the recruitment campaign that's been so successful, the numbers we're getting in month by month for the first capacity at Waikiria, I think reasonably gives us some assurance that that can continue on. I think, Rebecca, we can talk about kind of what that next stage is.
That's all right. We can. So that's wasn't necessarily the critical forward.
I think I'm saying I have reasonably high degree of confidence
that you can get there.
That we can get there at Waikiria.
So speaking of, as part of the section, the increased numbers of corrections officers, as an example, I know that you have lots of other staff, not just corrections officers, but that seems to be the metric we measure ratios with. So you said that you had increased that by 802. I missed the percentage, but can you give us an idea of how many of that increase to correction officers is part of the increase in prison numbers, and how much of it is essentially filling vacant roles or increasing capacity? Because over a long period of time, we've heard that things haven't been able to be done, or measures haven't been able to be met because of staffing shortages. And we know that the ratio at the end of 2023 was 2.5 officers to 1 prisoner, and now it's 2.4. So you have eaten into that. But just saying that you're hiring lots more correction officers doesn't make the problem go away if they're there in
You're looking for more
anticipation-
specificity in terms
If
of the.
they're there in anticipation of a growing prison muster and a
Not,
growing
not,
prison
in,
numbers.
not always in anticipation of, but the point you are making is absolutely critical. The corrections officer cohort number for our organisation is not static. It is a directly related number to the prison population, particularly when you talk about corrections officers. So we do not have a static target. Rebecca's team are not aiming for a number that once achieved, that's it. They can high five and say, we've done our work. The population is always needing to be viewed as the kind of moderating part of what our efforts need to be around recruiting, onboarding, training, and then consolidating into our core operations looks
So
like.
do you have an idea of that 800 that have come online since the end of 2020 or June
Well,
2023?
the maths will be the increase of the prison population, which has broadly been about 1,000.
About 1,000, yes.
And the ratio of our corrections officers to service that 1,000 increase, that proportion versus the gap we had of vacancies based on the starting point of population at the beginning of the year, that will be the bit. But we do not appropriate which officers have been addressing
I get
which
it. I'm
bits.
trying to get an idea of if you're saying that you've done heaps of recruiting, and I know you have, and I saw
And it's addressing
campaigns.
turnover, the gaps we had.
I know, but it's not really addressing
and
those
capacity.
staff shortages that have been cited as the reason as to why lots of metrics haven't been met. It eats into it somewhat, but it is mostly accounting for increases in prisoner numbers.
Yeah, again, I do think you've got some great numbers in terms of the vacancies we've got because, well, I'll take it. So
What we might do, if I pause there, Jeremy, we've got a section on recruitment and retention coming
well,
up.
that might be the time to do it then.
We'll give Rebecca some time to prep. We've got a queue
The numbers
of
are here.
supplementaries lined up. So I'm going to go Duncan, then Paolo, then Rema, then Todd. So Duncan first.
Just really going along those lines around staffing and ability to meet obligations, which is what we've talked about previously.
Yeah.
It does strike me that corrections is still not meeting its legal obligations under the Act in a number of ways. And I'm interested in you essentially explaining that. Obviously, visiting times is the most obvious and visible one. When was the last time that every prison gave every prisoner all of their visiting rights?
Great. Okay. Well, I will hand to the Commissioner of Custodial Services, Lee Marsh, who is chapter and verse on this, where we come from and where we're at today.
Okay.
So this has been an ongoing focus for us through that recovery of COVID, both with challenges of staffing and population rise. When we talk beyond visits, the whole minimum entitlement suite of services that we provide, we've observed adherence to that and significant increase in delivery of that. In regards to visits, I can confirm that all of our prison sites are affording the opportunity for visits for all prisoners across our estate. It doesn't mean every prisoner gets a visit if they are in a different geographic location.
Well, that's not what the website says. The website says that Christchurch Men's and Rumataka have limited visiting rights.
Oh, that may be an issue with the website. We'll sort that. I confirmed
So
this week.
every visitor, if they ask and people are available, can get a 30-minute visit every week.
It's far more than that. They're normally between 1 and 2 hours and they're done by unit. It isn't every day of the week. It is over a 7-day period. So some units will run them.
So so there's no prison that isn't meeting its visiting obligation. Right. Okay. What about case management plans? Because this is the other area which historically corrections hasn't been ensuring that every sentenced prisoner has a case management plan. Are you now complying with that obligation?
Our sentenced prisoners have offender management plans. What I do have to acknowledge, though, is the sheer turnover and the impact of the remand population and the effect that is having on people moving through the system. And what I would call out, and I think we touched on this a little bit before in regards to court timeliness, what we observe in that conversion between our remand and our sentence population is we start to see in the vicinity of 28-29% of newly sentenced prisoners receiving time served. So the allocation of that case manager at the sentence point and the access to rehab is impacted. which is why we're focusing.
So
in
in terms of people who remain in custody after sentencing, what proportion are not getting case management plans?
They will all have a plan. What you may be referencing is the allocation to a case manager, and that may be dependent upon movement through the network. So they may have a case manager at one site, be transferred another site and be waiting allocation. So many of the stats are point in time.
Are you
Well,
specifically, sorry,
look,
are you specifically talking
you
about
seem
the
to be-
audited measures?
Look,
The
it might be
77%?
better if you just tell us, because I appreciate that you're trying to demonstrate that Corrections is doing as best it can, but in terms of the scrutiny of Parliament, we do want to know what you're not doing.
Yeah.
And you're telling me that in terms of the provision of good case management to prisoners, you're not doing essentially what best practice is and arguably what is required by the Corrections Act. How extensive is that failure?
I think the best way for us to describe it is in that audited measure. So on page 87 of the annual report, the audited measure around assessment of performance for percentage of offenders from a timeliness perspective, I think that gives you an indication. So 77% against the greater or equal to 85% is the way in which we hold ourselves to account. So at one level, 8% away from the target measure is how you might view our performance. So still work to do. And I think, if I may, this speaks to a much broader topic for us as an organisation, which is the critical kind of partner to the optimising our services approach, which is us as an organisation recognising that compartmentalising plans for people is pretty unhelpful for helping them have continuity of care and continuity of services throughout their experience with us. So I am not saying we are accepting the 77% performance achieved last year as acceptable. I'm saying just achieving of that performance target or measure, I don't believe is the answer. I think we've got to, like optimising our services, take a step back, ask ourselves, with that changing landscape of much more of the numbers of people we manage and care for in prison being on remand, what are the changes we need to make to our system that ensures that we're better connecting with people, their whānau, their support outside in society that might take them on a better and more positive path? And can we do something different in that space that actually joins up the work done by bail support officers, probation officers very early on in someone's trajectory into the criminal justice system through provision of advice to court reports and the like, the offender management plan, when they come into custody, initial assessments on remand, but the majority of the work done once on sentence. And for us at the moment, for shorter sentences, not much time between remand convicted and sentenced ultimately coming, so that by the time the case management plan lands.
Do you think the Corrections Act is unhelpful in requiring plans or case management for periods of time which you can't get a meaningful outcome?
I think
because it does require that, right?
I think what I would reflect is that the specific named requirements of a plan for the purposes to meet the Act is probably slightly unhelpful because it focuses on bits of the system rather than appreciating a person and what a person might need. So we've almost designed something that is to align with the criminal justice system rather than thinking what might be most effective for a person to engage with a plan to actually drive change. So we can talk at more length or later.
Time's constrained and I'm aware of that. So a couple of other questions I want to move on to. One is just the exercise requirement, which has been problematic in the past. So are you confident that every prisoner is getting their entitlement to daily exercise?
Yes, but there are qualifications to that in terms of, so entitlement, yes, but some with certain conditions.
I mean, it's an hour a day, right? Every 24 hours, an hour.
Correct.
Yes, that is correct. And far across our estate in the majority of our units, it would be far more than that. The unlock period would be throughout the entire operational day. There will be operational reasons where that might be compromised, such as an event or an incident.
Yeah, okay. I mean, those events, if there's a disruption to a prison, a riot or whatever, I accept that. We can put all of those aside.
Yes.
But in terms of operational requirements, such as having enough staff, are they impacting on the ability?
No, that's not having an impact on the ability. The greater impact would be from the separations of classifications of individuals when we see our populations within the same
Right.
environment.
So there are prisoners who aren't getting that because of operational constraints, not
No.
extraordinary incidents.
No, that's not what I said. What I was meaning was that would be limited closer to the hour as opposed to the entire operational day. So we may run 2 4-hour split landings as opposed to a whole 8-hour day. So not everyone would get an entire day, but they are all getting more than an hour.
Just before you keep going.
All right, just one
I'll
last.
let you go. I'm just saying there's about half an hour of the remaining time.
Yeah, I've really only got one other theme I want to touch on, and that is the new prisons that are being designed. Are they being designed to accommodate 2 prisoners to a cell or only 1?
They are being designed so that that is an option. Yeah.
So in terms of the Mandela principles, which is set out, which are referenced in the Corrections Act, it's pretty clear that double bunking isn't consistent with the Mandela principle. It talks about only having 1 prisoner in 1 cell. How do you reconcile designing a prison that's not consistent with our international obligations?
I think for us, it's making sure that we are adhering to those standards that are important to people having positive interactions and a safe environment. So double bunking for us within the New Zealand context, as it is with Australia as well, a common occurrence, but not done without really critical risk assessment and making sure that we are purposeful in appreciating where it is and where it's not appropriate for prisoners to share cells.
Well, so this is United Nations Standard Minimum Rules for treatment of prisoners. The Act in Section 5 says that that the corrections purpose is to contribute to society by adhering to those rules. How do you justify not adhering to those rules?
We don't justify not adhering to those rules. We are making sure that any placement in a cell where 2 prisoners are housed is done safely, and we are maintaining all of the necessary risk assessments.
I mean, I can find it, but do I need to cite the rules, the Mandela rules, which say that prisoners should only be accommodated 1 prisoner to a cell overnight?
No.
Well, you've just said that you accommodate more than 1 prisoner in a cell overnight on some occasions.
And have consistently for many years.
Yeah, and you're designing future prisons to accommodate 2 prisoners per cell overnight in breach of the Mandela rules.
From an operational perspective, that is a requirement for us in terms of the approach we take.
What comes first, operational requirements or legal requirements?
Our legal requirements are critical within a New Zealand context.
Well, you might want to redesign your prison then.
Okay,
So that's all.
Thank you. I've got line of questioning from Paolo and then Rima. Is it supplementary, or do you want to just start a new line of questions?
It's supplementary to infrastructure.
We'll go to Paolo.
So Jeremy, you've spoken about infrastructure development into the future, speaking about Waikaria 1 and 2, and the aim of addressing the increasing prison population. My question has to do with the remand population, which is mainly focused on Mount Eden. And knowing that most prisons were built expecting about 15% in remand prisoners, and the way remand prisoners are tracking. Could you speak, please, to the financial aspect of corrections having to deal with that increasing remand population? And what infrastructure plans would there be to expand Mount Eden, if not the prisons that impact on the greater Auckland area?
Yes, sure. Well, firstly, yes, I won't repeat the change in the proportion of prisoners who are on remand versus sentenced over the course of the last 10, 15 years. It has been stark and is informing changes to the approaches that we take. I spoke under that long-term network configuration plan, the 20-year view of what future infrastructure should look like, to a focus on high security. High security accommodation is critical for us to ensure we've got resilient infrastructure for those that we have less knowledge of who are perhaps more volatile, less stable. So that high security focus is very much helping us with ensuring we've got the right sort of infrastructure that's useful for remand, but also actually is resilient to then any other type of prisoner need, as may happen into the future, because this infrastructure is here for the long term. We want to get it right, but we also want it to be as practical and deployable as we possibly can. So that's probably number one. You've heard and you've acknowledged Waikato as the first focus. I then referenced Christchurch Men's Prison. That is, for the South Island, a very important place for remand. And at the moment, we have had to retire some pretty critical infrastructure that's of a high security nature that we will need to replace. So that's why Christchurch Men's is a focus. Your reference to Auckland, and it is relevant because for New Zealand, Auckland makes up a significant part of the overall population, and we therefore recognise that will continue to be an area of growth. And because remand is growing, we should focus on that. There are no immediate plans because we have good capacity at Mount Eden, and therefore we feel confident for the next few years. But that was one of the reasons why we placed Auckland Prison on the fast track list, to ensure that we were not absent an option or a plan, and that we could go through the consenting process sooner, so that should further need for high security in the Auckland area eventuate, we weren't starting from a point where we had to start the consenting process. We'd already established the ability to do that. So we're not there yet. That's a process we need to go through. That will involve community consultation, all of those sorts of things in due course. But the thinking behind it is to make sure we're not caught out and we have a plan and we're prepared.
Just one quick sub to that. How do you compare the discussion on remand and international best practice? Because you mentioned Australia.
Yeah.
How do we compare?
Well, unfortunately, they are experiencing very, very similar trends, with the exception of one state. So Victoria is, I think I'm okay to say, bucking the trend because they are seeing a continued decrease in, certainly stabilising, but decrease in their prison population. Their remand isn't growing. I just at the Corrective Service Administrators Council conference last week. We meet 3 times a year. I'd love to say they were able to articulate clearly why. They can't. So we are very interested in understanding further the reasons for that, but they have acknowledged, as you've heard already today, the complexity of trying to identify causal factors for things occurring. Their reflections at this stage are much more looking out of the even criminal justice system to other societal settings, cues from society, what that state is talking about, focused on, versus other parts of Australia as being some of the factors that are worthy of consideration. So there's probably more for us to understand and look at there, but they are not saying, here's the answer. Everyone is saying it'll be interesting to understand more.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're now into the recruitment and retention part. I've still got subs from Rima and Todd, and given the crossover, it's probably okay to keep on lines of questions. So I'll go to Rima first, or it could be a new line as well.
That's okay. I'll go to my colleague.
Todd.
Oh, yeah, mine's loosely linked here. So thank you, Mr. Lightfoot. Prison, obviously, we've already heard prison populations going up. Obviously, the government's been very clear that it's going to see an increase in prison numbers with its law and order agenda. And I'm really interested, again, we've been doing some work in this committee around my own members bill, which is around kind of rehabilitation. And you said you're talking to Dr. Webb about case management, not everyone having case management plans. But I'm really interested to understand, basically in the last year, like the 23-24 year, what were you doing really to put more rehabilitation and really prisoner design programs in place? How are you really drilling into what are the effective ones? And again, we know this from some of the work this committee's done, that not all programs are available everywhere, but I think that's going to be something you're going to have to really focus on in the coming years, 100%. Because how are we making sure we're actually getting the really effective programs in place?
And to the people who need them
and to the
most.
people who need
Yeah,
them. Because I think is really important. Because I do think it's one thing to lock people up, but we've got to make sure they have an opportunity to actually turn things around. And so I want to keep very keen to hear a bit more about what you've done and then what you're planning to do.
Yeah. I'll just jump in briefly. We do have a section on rehab to integrate back into the end and under other matters, but I'll allow this line of questioning, then we'll try and stick back to recruitment, retention, and financial information. But if you can give a brief answer now, Jeremy, then we'll revisit if that's all right, Todd.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Chair. And just thinking about the broader opportunity towards the end of the agenda to cover in more detail, I might refer you back to the, rather than asking her to repeat some of it, the description of the optimising our services work and the appreciation of the critical importance of us understanding the cohorts we've got, where they're at within their cycle in the criminal justice system, the services we've got today and what we're going to need to move towards into the future. So that work is really, really important. I think the immediate sort of answer to your question in terms of this year is probably one of practical application, which is coming out of a period where your colleague was referencing kind of visits not being at the levels that we would have liked because of staffing shortages, exercise being sometimes challenged operationally and other things. Treatment was equally something that we were really having to think innovatively about in terms of how we were going to deliver it, sometimes on ABL links and the like. I think the last 12 months has probably been a year of recovering back. So ensuring that program facilitators, external service providers, psychologists, making sure that all of those different practitioners are accessing the spaces within our prisons that they need to be effective in the work they do. I feel that we have made good gains back and recovered some of the normalising of what we used to do before COVID hit, so that's now much more accepted. The next stage is how does optimising our services then start to shift what we have always done to something that speaks to some of the things that you're talking about, the right intervention at the right time for the right people that has the greatest impact. So we'll come back onto that maybe when we move to that item on the agenda. But a year of recovery is probably the best description of what the last 12 months has been.
Thanks. No, thank you, Todd. And sorry, I apologize. I should have mentioned before that we were going to revisit this in the other matters section. Any question lines on recruitment and retention? I've got Jamie next.
Yeah, I'll touch into that. Thank you. So you've touched on today already updates on recruitment. So maybe just can you give us some more details around that, your retention numbers that are so important going forward? But it'd be of interest to the committee. I think it was about a year ago we saw that big campaign, the recruitment campaign. So how did that go and how do you see that rolling out in the near future?
Great, thank you. I will now ask DCE People and Capability Rebecca to go back to the chair.
She's been waiting.
This is kind of a pretty significant part of what we have been focusing on for obvious reasons. And I guess to start with the campaign, the second campaign, so lessons learned from the first, has been a really significant contributor to, we believe, the numbers of applications coming in, the nature of the people applying, and then our ability to translate those into really good and committed people starting careers with us and sometimes returning to careers with us in corrections. I think the only other thing I would sort of reflect on before handing over to Rebecca is that through that campaign, it has been able to connect with communities in a way that probably we haven't experienced in the past outside of the recruitment value. So we really understand, I think, now the importance of maintaining connection, visibility, and constant conversation about the role that corrections plays within society, because often we're sort of a bit behind the curtain or not really understood in quite the way we need to be. And I think
you could have brought through the ads to people's living rooms, and I remember watching that, and it was quite touching and sense the reality of what you're asking.
So that would be some of my reflections. But back to some of the specific questions. I'm sure Rebecca will be able to take you through some of those statistics.
I won't bury the lead. The campaign was successful. Since 1st of October 2022, we've had almost 55,000 applications for frontline roles at corrections. And that has meant that the campaign was successful. The market conditions that we're seeing are favourable for us. We are doing a lot of work within the organisation to listen to the voice of our people and understand what it is that gives them satisfaction in their careers and creates the kinds of workplaces that they want to be part of. And as a result, we've seen our turnover numbers drop quite significantly as well. So again, it's not one thing, it's probably the culmination of a number of things. On the turnover numbers, so they're down to 9.3% as at October. So that is down from 15.1% in June 2023. So quite significant there as well. On the campaign, we actually are really proud of the campaign. I think that it was a simple but effective way to show people exactly, as Jeremy said, kind of what our people do and what they're responsible for. A lot of work went into it. It's based on the real stories of our people. So the team opened up the ability for staff to tell us about their work. And one thing that's really unique about our people is quite often they don't see the work that they do as being really powerful, or they don't see the good news stories, because to them it's a job that they get up and go to work every day and they do what they've got to do. So we were able to get some great stories from them. And the thing that I love about the campaign more than anything is that we've got the ability to continue telling our people stories because they're really powerful. And what it means is that when we go into the next iterations of campaigns, we've got a strong base to draw from. There was a piece of research that was carried out in April, which kind of showed some of the results that it was effective, with 1 in 3 people saying that they'd seen or heard the communication. We had clearly communicated the message of making a difference, and people described the campaign as educational, hopeful and progressive. And what that means is that we've developed some brand equity. So we've been able to be really effective this year in targeting our advertising spend, which has delivered us some savings as a result, because people are aware of the campaign. Also, as our appointment numbers have increased, we're obviously not going to continue to flood the market with advertising when we're meeting the numbers that we want to see.
Can you give any details on, like, obviously the nature of the people that have applied, and obviously you start off with a certain number and how you work through a process, and how many actually become correction officers? Can you give that kind of detail?
I don't have the conversion numbers in front of me to hand, but so from 55,000, which sounds like a really big number, obviously because of the nature of the work that we do, the processes that we use to assess people are really stringent. So it's based on initially phone screening. Obviously, we have assessment centres where there are role play activities so that our managers can really test and see the types of responses that potential applicants would give in a role play scenario. There are criminal conviction checks. There's a physical assessment. So what I'm saying is, from a really big number, you do get down to quite a much smaller number than that. In terms of that 55,000, we've recruited 2,156 people into corrections officer roles over that period of time. We also have maintained a monthly average of over 4,000 over a 6-month period. That's a monthly average, where in the year prior it had been around 600. And we've got a really strong pipeline of candidates also. And I thought it might be useful if I just touched on what vacancy numbers look like now. So currently we have around 211 vacancies for corrections officers, and that's from an establishment of over 4,500, pushing towards 5,000. Now, as well as that 211, because it wouldn't be fair to our people for me to say we're only 211 down. We've got 277 that are currently undertaking training, so are not operational right now, but are very, very soon to be. And I thought it might be of interest to the committee just to provide a short update on where we're heading with Waikeria recruitment. I heard the comments around it being difficult due to its isolation, or where it is located. Again, a dedicated recruitment team have just achieved some really significant results there. So we need a total of 455 staff for that site. And currently, we've been tracking an average of 15 a month. We've got 66 that we need to recruit still. But of the 66, there are 38 that are currently in training and a further 20 due to start with us on Monday, the 6th of January. So we're well on track there. Obviously with an expanded site opening in 2029, we've got modelling and work to do to determine the numbers that we need. But we've built some really strong local relationships and processes in that region. And I'm really confident that when we start to head towards active recruiting people, we'll be in a really good state to do so.
Thank you, Rebecca. Any further, Jamie or voters?
Yeah, well, if I may, I'll just continue through because once obviously you become a part of corrections, the next important thing is around staff safety and wellbeing. So could you take us for a couple of minutes through improvements in that area and what you're trying to do to keep your people safe?
Yeah, I might hand to Lee because he's leading that work on behalf of the organisation in partnership with both Cairns and PSA. So
yeah, there's been a considerable amount of work done actually over the last 18 to 24 months in partnership with both those unions, which was initially our reducing violence and aggression in prisons work. That has evolved this year into the establishment of co-designed and delivered safer prison plans at each of our sites, where our frontline staff are directly contributing to the design and creation of the activity change processes and actions at a site level under some very specific categories that help keep them safe, and they drive a lot of that activity. We're in the process of launching that. We've had about half of our prisons have launched that now. The next will be over the next few weeks through that engagement model. We're also continuing to review all of our tactical equipment. That is an ongoing thing that we've been working on for some time now. We've got an established a tactical review committee in partnership with our unions, with frontline representation, to ensure that we have the right tools for the jobs to keep them safe. Also, on the back of the feedback we've had through both unions, we've established things such as wellness days within our custodial environment, just to ensure that our staff have the ability to build those tight teams. One of the key things to safety in our frontline is those tight teams and confidence to do those jobs. And when we have a lot of new staff coming in, we want to establish those and reinforce them as quickly as possible. So having that in place made a considerable difference to our frontline staff. Going into 2025, we're looking at doing a more pan-Australasia approach to understanding violence and aggression in prisons. And again, heavily driven by our union partners, we're looking at hosting our inaugural discussion with our partner states over in Australia on efforts that they've done, both in the industrial relations space, but in the direct custodial space around reduction of violence and aggression, and starting dialogue across all of those states and ourselves as a jurisdiction.
Thank you. Francisco.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to clarify one of the things that you mentioned. You mentioned there were favorable market conditions at the moment for recruitment. Does that mean that sort of record high unemployment rate and the sort of public service job cuts as well? Is that contributing to making it easier to hire staff?
I would be doing my team a disservice if I pretended I was the expert on that. What I'm saying is that there is no shortage of interest in working for corrections. I think that the reasons for that are probably really, really multivariate.
Okay, Remus.
Yeah, supplementary to that. Can you direct our attention to some changes perhaps in the approach with recruitment? I think we've touched upon it in different conversations, but what clearly positive changes have been made in the last that has attracted more people, as opposed to labelling it as just because they're unemployed?
Yeah, well, I think I would start back to that campaign and the impact of the campaign and the ability to engage in a very different way with communities. But Rebecca, I mean, you talk about your talented team of people who are focused on ensuring we've got the right people, and that approach, I think, in building that team, getting that focus and being really disciplined across the whole of our ask rather than in pockets. So being really coordinated, that's probably been the big shift in the last 12 months.
Can I actually, before I forget my thought, when you say targeting towards different people in the community, I remember when I was talking last year, I came across a mother and a daughter in Takanini, that they're both corrections officers, and they spoke a lot about that mental health situation, that it's really taxing on one's mental health. 100%. And I know, if you can refresh my memory, that part of the recruitment process has been a bigger focus, maybe, on that aspect as well, that the mental health needs of the corrections officers will be more addressed? Has that been part of the kaupapa, or is it more when they're hired?
I mean, I can maybe start out. I think the issue you speak of is absolutely real, which is our frontline professionals turn up every day and are confronted with a whole range of traumatic experiences in certain settings. We have to recognise that has impact. So the approaches we are taking in creating those wellness days, those opportunities for teams to connect outside of the context of their work, is a really important part of giving them levels of protection. Trying to encourage greater levels of transparency for people to be able to talk about those things, and ensuring that our EAP services are specifically focused on and trained in talking to our staff about those factors should they be seeking those services. So I think that's a broader service offering rather than something that we're particularly addressing through recruitment. It is something that we are conscious of in terms of the attributes of the people we are sort of looking at, and that perhaps I would not wish to speak to the evidence of this, but that might speak in part to the difference between the number of applications, very big number, and the number of those who ultimately make it through to our training. That process, with all of the different steps, checks and balances, is seeking to ensure we're identifying people with the most appropriate attributes to be able to manage well and be effective in some pretty challenging environments. So I think that would be how I would frame those two components. There's awareness of it and addressing for our colleagues more generally, and then it is a component of our recruitment process.
Okay, thank you. We're now into the financial information section, so we'll move on to any questions. We only have 5 minutes remaining for the section, then we'll move on to rehabilitation. So members with any questions directed towards financial information, scrutiny of that area, particularly around forecasts and changes in demand?
Yes.
Sorry,
put me on the hot.
All right, I won't flick your time over here.
Yeah, don't put my time. Okay, so we've heard a lot today about the fact that predicted increase in prison numbers and some big infrastructure issues and necessities in front of you in terms of being able to build that capacity. How does that look in terms of that future funding? Is that a big budget bid again for next year, or how? What's the sort of pipeline, I suppose, of priorities for the department?
Yeah, well, I won't sort of connect it to budget-sensitive matters clearly in this environment, but I think it'd be fair to say we continue our focus on ensuring that every dollar spent is spent on the most impactful and effective areas. So I think the discipline we've had over it's not been the last 12 months, actually, it's been the last 24 or so, on ensuring that we are truly connected to all of the activities the organisation's undertaking, and we're able to connect those activities to purposeful work in pursuit of the outcomes that we have as an organisation. That's kind of mission critical number one. We were asked to set a 6.5% reduction in our overall spending last year. And you've already referred to some of the focus that we have had, the back office reductions, for example, and our focus on optimising our services. Yeah. That discipline has been, I think, a really important one for probably any organisation, but certainly for ours, because it has given us, I suppose, the focus to step back, to allow us to look at that optimising our services approach, say, are we being most effective with the always limited resources we've got, and are focusing in the most impactful areas.
Okay, can I just ask a very quick question just to finish that off? I'm just conscious this comes out of my time and I'm running out of time. So it's not that I'm not interested. The back office jobs, the back office roles, there was a sizable amount of money that was presented as part of the budget.
43 million
at least.
Per annum.
Yeah, I think.
43 million.
It was 43, was it?
Yeah.
But most of those roles, 130 something of them, were vacant. How does that save money?
Because we have now removed those vacancies from our organisation, and obviously our baseline funding is funding to recruit to all of those roles. So I'm sorry,
more than
the opportunity for me to sort of articulate the full answer that I think
That
I
it
need
deserves,
to.
possibly we don't have time.
I don't know. You've heard from me about the importance of Te Ara Whakamua, the pathway forward. We engaged with our organisation, informed by, but not solely as a consequence of the Ombudsman systemic investigation. We knew we needed to make some significant changes. We received, through that initial engagement with our organisation and other stakeholders, over 3,500 pieces of insight and feedback. That forced us to pause and think, well, what does the better future organisational construct look like? Not just the structure, but the culture, the approach we want to take as an organisation. That presented us an opportunity to pause the kind of what we've got today and what we're recruiting to. That was 6 months prior to the reductions in baseline spending. And therefore, I suppose we were a bit ahead of the curve in being able to predict the better shaping of, with the resources we had available, the enabling services we're going to most support us being able to achieve our core purpose and operational function.
Okay, and I'll stop you there again because that comes out of my time and I've got some other questions to go. And I suppose that does answer my question insofar as how were you able to do that? Because there was a natural shift from one program to another, and it wasn't.
And the reason probably we had those vacancy levels in part was because we were pausing because we knew we had structural change coming, and therefore there was some benefit of those two things happening in a sort of decent sequence.
Okay, very good. We'll move on to rehab and reintegration now. So we've got 20 minutes for this topic. Just bearing in mind that we missed it out before, so I will start off with Tracy.
So the rehab program effectiveness, and I know that we've already touched on this in a kind of not a very joined up way because we haven't left it as its own section, but in November this year, so just last month, there was an RNZ piece essentially saying from the prison reform advocates criticising corrections for its inability to deliver effective rehabilitation programs. Despite spending $376 million on rehabilitation in the last financial year, most programs reduced reoffending by less than 2%. Critics argued that the programs were not intensive enough and called for funding for more effective alternatives. So I know that you've done a review of the programs and we've talked largely a lot about that. We know that we've got the report in front of us and the rehabilitation quotients aren't flash, they never are. If we look, even just quickly look at it, we know that the psychological programs, the special treatments are the ones that are the only ones to reach statistically significant. And we could also see at a quick glance that the community-based interventions seem to fare a little bit better than the prison-based interventions. So with that in mind, my first comment, I suppose, is that convince me that therefore putting more and more people in prison to do prison rehabilitation instead of in the community and doing community rehabilitation is a good idea. And then convince me that the tagged contingency for remand rehabilitation funding from budget 2024, which isn't available until June next year, hence the fact to give you time to do your reevaluation, is that tag contingency enough to provide the programs for remand prisoners? And what analysis have you done to make sure that taking on this huge amount of work, which is providing rehabilitation for remand prisoners, isn't going to be at the expense of what is a pretty important yet hard to achieve outcome for people who are already sentenced? I know that's a big question and you've got 5 minutes.
Wow. You've asked us to convince you, and I don't want to convince you. So in terms of the effectiveness of being able to help people leave us in a better state with brighter prospects from a custodial context, I think the data speaks for itself. Shorter sentences, the churn, as I would probably unhelpfully call it, on remand for extended periods of time, in and out, maybe sometimes on bail, breaching of bail, back into custody, and then finally a sentence and end of sentence achieved. And have we really been effective? I would say probably not. So I think we see a lot of challenge in that space. And I think that is absolutely something that, again, I'd refer to the sector as a whole. The sector, chief executives and others looking at timely access to justice and thinking about those inflows into custody, the effectiveness of the courts, and then our role with others in community about how we rehabilitate and reintegrate people back. That focus, I think, is driving the right sorts of conversations about who is coming into which bits of the criminal justice system. And I think consideration possibly in the future does need to be given to what the right lengths of sentences in custody are for those serious, violent, child sex offending type offences, that if we have longer, stable custodial sentence periods, change and difference can happen. It's the short end of that pathway where I think you are pointing at really compelling data that says, are we really being effective in rehabilitating for a sentence of 2 years or less? Because in effect, only 12 months is served. So I think that is and will continue to be an ongoing thing that the sector as a whole will need to look at and pay attention to. And then in terms of are we biting off more than we can chew in terms of a focus on the remand convicted part of our population from a treatment perspective, there was certainly an aspect of that, which is why, as we were planning the approach to consuming that new challenge, we deliberately sought not to receive that funding in the first year of Budget 24 money, because we knew we had much work to do. And Alice has taken you through what that is. She's led the kind of strategic approach that we've taken to the optimising our services work, so that we would have space to ensure that we weren't adding more into an already cluttered environment that we hadn't necessarily taken a step back and assessed.
So are you ready to go?
We will be ready on July the 1st, 2025. Is that, Alice will have probably
and I
more
don't
to say.
know all the details, just the whether you've done that work. I know you've done a lot of the review work, whether the changes that are anticipated.
We've done a lot of work. We've the focus has been on resetting the system before we layer more in. And we've had to take specific account of the opportunity to serve people on remand in the most appropriate way. Our goal is to deliver a consistent and effective level of service for people on remand. Obviously, treating remand accused and remand convicted differently. Consistent is really important because things across our estate can look quite different, but we don't want that experience to be markedly different. We want everyone that we have an opportunity to interact with to leave us better and with brighter prospects, whether that's a short or a long stay. And effective is actually recognising, given the time that we have and the levels of displacement or moving around our network due to court and other requirements, what can be effective in that context. So thinking about modular, thinking about things that can be picked up and started, things that don't require a long time or a lot of space. To deliver.
So whilst we're talking about that being consistent across, I mean, some of the commentary coming out, we know that there's a move toward a more brief intervention. So people in the community are interpreting that as being watering down what you're offering, essentially, moving from intensive programs, which we see can work, to brief interventions, which we don't have a lot of faith in. But what you're saying is that's because it's the remand aspect that's coming in. But what I want to know is that whilst accommodating the remand prisoners, that the longer term prisoners rehabilitation offerings don't also get turned into brief interventions, because that's where you need to focus to accommodate.
I mean, we are as equally focused on performance improvement as we are on performance itself. To get a sensible view of performance, we really needed to reset the system and reconfigure what supply and demand looked like. Performance improvement is the thing that comes next. So we've got a program of work post this phase of optimising our services that looks at future focus areas to monitor, to deliver either quick kind of feedback loops in, or to deep dive where we know that there's an opportunity to do something different and better.
Thank you. Any subs?
Kind of, yes. So just a bit broadly, two questions. One is, in the justice cluster, is kind of rehabilitation, integration, is that a topic that's being discussed? It's firstly. And we now also have a new agency, new central agency in the Social Investment Agency. Again, is corrections engaging with that agency to start to think about actually new interventions that could be delivered in different ways? Because this is a very recidivism and obviously having people move back into society is a very There's lots of factors, right? And a lot of it is to do with social issues, housing, etc. So very keen to get your thoughts on what you might be thinking about doing differently.
Well,
and
I'll do your
agencies.
first two quick questions,
Yeah.
and then Alice can probably follow on with some more. Firstly, yes, it is a topic of conversation, and I think my articulation of timely access to justice, the inflow, the effectiveness of the court system, and in the outflow, that is where we are being held to account to make sure that people don't forget that we do have a critical contribution to make. So that's the context within which it's discussed. The second, the Social Investment Agency, I'm delighted to know that there is a very effective chief executive leading that organisation who is a close friend of the criminal justice system in the name of Andrew Costa. He is very well aware of the impact within a criminal justice context of social harm, social investment opportunity, and he appreciates the data and the insights that are available within the criminal context to understand perhaps circumstances that occurred way before the criminal justice system intervened to perhaps inform what else can be done to invest in to get ahead and prevent the inevitable growth otherwise in prison populations and greater impact into the criminal justice system. So I think I would describe myself as being hopeful that there will continue to be really positive conversations about what we know and how that can help inform greater efforts around prevention into the future through social investment. But
yeah, I would just add to that we have, through optimising our services, that program of work, we've kind of set ourselves up well to contribute into a broader social investment approach in a couple of ways. So we now understand the breadth of data that we have. We know that we don't share a lot into the integrated data infrastructure, but we have identified what we think would be of value, and we are intent on lifting the visibility of the information that we do hold so that the broader system can utilise it and make more informed, hopefully more effective decisions in terms of shifting the outcomes to what we are all here for. And then the second part of that is actually just us understanding what we have and where we can have the greatest impact is really important, because you don't want to imagine when you start sharing with others and integrating and being accountable for certain parts of a collective approach through social investment.
Thanks, Alice. I've got something, Cameron, and then we're going to go to a primary from Tracy. It's just on the justice sector, justice cluster approach. You mentioned you're part of the outflow and you're one part of the accountability measures there. Is there enough accountability and scrutiny on the sector as a whole on how the sector is performing and meeting outcomes?
I think we will wait and see what the scrutiny review achieves when we are together
next year. Okay, very good.
Yeah.
And the second part of that question is, it strikes me that there are probably more incentives for organisations like police and corrections to improve the justice sector than there might be for the Ministry of Justice itself. They are a large organisation with its own part to play. But surely corrections has a very large incentive to make sure that there is less offending and fewer clients or prisoners coming through. Is there a place for corrections to take a larger stewardship role in that sector as opposed to justice?
Well, maybe I can just talk to one specific example. So I've mentioned a lot this morning around timely access to justice. I chair a fortnightly Justice Sector Leadership Board subgroup, which the Secretary of Justice, Andrew Kibblewhite, and historically Andy Costa, now Richard Chambers, attend as well. And the other really critical part of that subgroup is that we have the Chief District Court Judge and his National Executive Judge present. That, I think, maybe, Chair, speaks to what you are sort of scratching away at, which is who sort of is most incented, who's most incented and impacted to agitate for the important need for change in the different parts of the system. And I think that's been collectively recognised by the leadership board, and there is not a protection kind of mode in operation, I don't believe, across the leadership. There is a real collective pursuit of trying to improve the system to do exactly what you're describing. See prevention happen more effectively earlier so that there are fewer victims being harmed, and the better, more productive part of the system is able to get on and do rather than the bit that, as your colleague has already acknowledged, once they are embedded and entrenched, it is much harder to shift. And there are, alongside criminogenic matters, many mental health, other issues that perhaps could be dealt with outside of the criminal justice system. So I think we collectively own that ambition. We've got lots to do to be able to move, but we are at least enabling ourselves to form a collective that isn't only defined by the Secretary of Justice leading every piece of work.
Yeah, thank you. I'll go Cameron, then Rima, Subs, and then the Prime
Thank you,
Tracy. I'll just note that there's 6 minutes remaining on this side and 15 and a half on this side. So Cameron, then Rima.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Lightfoot. Now, we had at Governance and Administration yesterday, Ben King, head of DPMC, and he was taking us through the 9 public service targets that they have been monitoring and overseeing and taking a leadership role in the reporting back of since July. I know that those targets aren't yours exactly, but nonetheless, there's a couple of justice cluster ones there. Reduced child and youth offending, reduced violent crime. I just wondered, what is corrections' role as far as, or what interface do you have with DPMC and the delivery and reporting on of those public service targets?
Sure. Well, firstly, I can refer back to my wonderful colleague Andrew Kibblewhite, who leads on accountability for that violence target. And I have an accountability to ensure that we have made our contribution around the effective treatment of those with violence offences. So I don't want to describe what we are doing at the moment, that reset, that step back around the services that we can provide. But the first cohort of offence types that we've focused on is violent offences. So that is effectively our contribution. Violence, child sex offending, that kind of focus around those offence types is ensuring that we as an agency have heard and seen the prioritisation of that type of offending to ensure that we have the most effective services laser focused on trying to address the causal factors around why that offending occurs and to do the best job we can whilst they're with us to reduce the likelihood of further victims through that offending into the future.
And just another sub, has the government's moved towards a quarterly action plans, quarterly reports, accountability line, if you like, has that been helpful to corrections in the work that you do in that legislative agenda as it's put forward and as it's reported back?
There is no question that we are focused on the targets and what is expected of all of us to help achieve them.
Thank you.
We are focused.
Thank you, Rima.
And just following on from this, if I can just ask a few practical questions about what you've just shared. Did you say that it's a fortnightly hui?
Yes.
Fortnightly.
And that's the plan. So you will find instances where we haven't met for a fortnight, but the cadence of the meetings is fortnightly.
That's wonderful. And when did this begin, this initiative?
It was probably, I want to say 18 months or so ago, something like that.
Months ago, okay. And usually how long do you meet up for?
An hour.
Oh, an hour.
Yeah.
And when you were talking about accountability, what is the mechanism for follow-up? Follow-ups on these?
The next meeting. So it is an orthodox meeting with an agenda, with actions set through the meeting and then returned to at the next meeting. So, and we do keep a very keen eye on the performance measures that we are watching. And maybe the final piece that I should mention, given I'm with members of Parliament, there is a Justice Sector Ministers meeting, and Minister Goldsmith, as the chair of that ministers meeting, has clearly articulated, has made it very clear to the collective chief executives that for him, timely access to justice is an absolute priority. So we are in no doubt as to why we need to be focused on it and be very collective in the approaches we're seeking to try and improve it.
Can I say that I really commend you on this initiative, because being in other select committees and we see different departments that should be on the same page but unfortunately aren't really singing from the same tune in terms of these type of initiatives. So I personally commend you on this, and I'd love to hear more about how you feel any positive outcomes from meeting up regularly as a cluster going forward.
It's always helpful from a team dynamic perspective. Well, maybe you could argue not always, but for us, I think as a collegial group, the more we're in contact and the more we're focused on fewer things that actually enable us to make practical change, I think that's also really super helpful. We will acknowledge there is a new commissioner of police who we'll need to introduce into this way of working. So Richard and I know each other. I know he's fully committed to ensuring that the system as a whole is as effective as possible. But that will be a new entrant into the JSLB subgroup environment.
Okay, thank you. You've got a minute remaining, but otherwise I'm going to go to Tracy.
Would you think of bringing in the Social Investment Commissioner?
Perhaps, although I would reflect that he will be, I suspect at the moment, inundated with many ideas. So I would hate to force myself upon his agency and sort of welcome, but he knows we're here, what our work is, and I'm sure we will be engaging and interacting in the coming months.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeremy. Tracy.
Thank you. And I'm glad that James actually brought up the justice cluster and your role in it, and whether corrections could rightly take a bit more of a role in that. And I wanted to, my last subject is in relation to mental health. I didn't mean to leave it to the end. It's just how it's got sort of bumped down a little bit because it's incredibly important. And I think it's reasonable to say that the Department of Corrections is dealing with more people with mental health illness than any other institution, which is not the way it should be. And that's not your fault, but something has gone wrong when we're in the situation that we are now. So can you therefore, I've got a couple of questions. Some of them are just very quick. There was no new funding for improving mental health services, MHS, and that doesn't mean mental health services, that's the name of the program in budget 24, and 4 community providers have since had their contracts axed. I assume because that tagged contingency, which will be part of your next year's plan, it will be available next year in relation to remand prisoners. So what's replacing that improving mental health services? And can you reassure me that the breakdown of what's replacing it isn't going to get diluted into the remand sphere, because we're already dealing with a lot of people who are incredibly unwell. And I don't want to get into the forensics versus mild, moderate sort of thing. I just want to know where the money's going and whether you're prepared to deal with what is before you.
Yes. Thank you, because it is a critical issue for the whole system. And again, I would say there has been really good and strong recognition of this as an issue that is not just a corrections issue, but it is something that can only be solved if other parts of the system are seeing who is in custody and what other parts of the system might need to lift up for that not to continue to be the case for the long term. I wonder, on the specific questions, Emma, talking about what...
And I don't need too many details because I'm aware of the fact we're running out of time, but just
for sure
reassurance.
It's just that Emma, as our Chief Mental Health Officer, has been in the detail of this for a long time, both from the original generation of the services that we first stood up to then learning a lot about what was working and some of the things that we needed to adjust to then get to a point where now we've got a view as to what can be most effective, whilst acknowledging Waikiria, the 96 mental health. I mean, all of this is us continuing to try and adapt to quite a dynamic environment. So I don't know, Emma, whether you can talk to the specifics of the question that the members described.
I can certainly provide assurance that the funding remains intact. As you may be aware, our mental health services are already available to anyone, anywhere in prison. So that does include remand. There won't be a shift in focus per se to remand. We just are there to meet the need wherever it presents itself. And so that funding will be redeployed to the delivery of mild to moderate mental health services. We are just working through the details of exactly what that'll look like with respect to potentially recruiting a few more internal staff into our intervention and support practice teams versus going out to the market to re-procure services through NGOs and the like.
And that's probably what I wanted to get at, because traditionally there's been this concept that if people have mental illness, you put them somewhere and you've had your units, but actually it's pervasive, it's everywhere.
Absolutely.
So why, So has your work on the review of the mental health provisions that you're able to provide included any real analysis on the prevalence rates? Because we talk in these lofty terms about people in prison having mental health issues, but there doesn't seem to be an awful lot of actual data about that. So has that happened, and do you feel equipped therefore to deal with the therapeutic side of it and not just
It's a good question. And you will no doubt be familiar with the INDIG study from 2016. So it's now quite outdated. And as part of the review process, we did look to what other sources could we lean on in the absence of an internally delivered new prevalence study that might tell us about what the need would be within our corrections system. So what we know from that prevalence study that was done in 2016, obviously there's a very significant need. 60% approximately of people at any given time will have a mental health need. We also, from looking internationally at other jurisdictions, suspect that that number has increased even further since that time, but we don't have that specific prevalence study for corrections.
Okay, so from your perspective as CE, what do you do, or what can you do as part of a system to say, hang on, system, how come we're just locking up unwell people?
Two things so far, and it's at the most intensive area, so forensic mental health and intellectual disability. I, with Emma's gentle encouragement, formulated two chief executive forums with a particular focus on why we were seeing greater numbers of people coming into the corrections system with those particular attributes, and whether or not the system was working as designed, as intended, or whether there were some things within that system that we actually needed to understand and perhaps adjust. So Emma has led, after convening those chief executive groups, two pieces of work that are designed to ensure the system is working more aligned to its design rather than how it's perhaps adjusted over probably many years. What's resulted is, particularly with the forensic mental health need, we have been, I think, pretty successful with the help of Health New Zealand in working much more collaboratively in understanding those who have forensic mental health need and who are at that critical level of placement but in a waiting list, so that we can see them in our system and we can highlight them to the Health New Zealand system. That might sound astonishing to you, but maybe not.
No, because I think
the two systems were not seeing each other. Maybe just the only other thing, given the question you've asked, that I think it's important I reference is that our minister has convened regular meetings with Minister Ducey to ensure that together there is a collective view of what must change.
Minister Ducey doesn't have budget for mental health.
No, but he has an interest in ensuring the system is working more effectively, and I think is very much able to channel some of the critical issues that we can identify into what might change within the wider health system.
Because at the moment, I mean, arguably, we're in a situation where it may not even be legal, let alone immoral, that we are actually incarcerating people who should be in the health system, and therefore corrections does have a role. And absolutely, I don't mean necessarily just bringing in Minister Ducey, who doesn't have probably.
No, I refer to that ministerial engagement just to say it is not just happening at an agency level, but there is ministerial interest.
And it's not your fault that you're up at the end of the line and having to do that.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, maybe we just finally talk about some of the ways in which we enact our obligations under the law to ensure that, again, we're using every instrument we have at our disposal to ensure that people do not go unnoticed by the wider system. So I just wonder whether you just want to touch on that, because I'd hate for you to think that we are ignorant of our
No,
obligations?
I don't think the ignorant of, I'm
okay.
just saying, what tools have you got available
okay.
to say we shouldn't have this person here? And if you're left with them, with custody of them in a situation where earlier on in the process, there should have been a section applied and there wasn't.
Certainly this work against the system mapping that has identified a number of case studies where things have led to us holding someone rather than the wider health system doing it has enabled us to improve in a range of areas. But do you want to pick up anything specific?
Perhaps just to add to what you've said, Jeremy, obviously there's the Criminal Procedure Mentally Impaired Persons Act that we work to ensure that people are following that legislated pathway, and that, you know, when it's indicated that they shouldn't be with us for, say, their Section 38 inquiries regarding their fitness for plea, that they are appropriately placed in a hospital if that is what is determined through the court process.
Able to do that? Have you ever been denied the ability to do that when you find that Section 38 applicable?
Not to the best of my knowledge. That generally tends to work quite well. There are sometimes cases where, well, actually, again, with the intellectually disabled people, again, they're following that criminal procedure mentally impaired persons pathway. Sometimes people slip through that and they have still come to us, and then we're again able to interact with agencies to try and get those people more appropriately placed as soon as possible. And then, of course, the other statutory lever that we have is the Section 45 under the Mental Health Act. If someone is very unwell in our care and we require them to be.
And has there ever been any inability not to be able to access what needs to be done then?
Yes. Yeah. Hence the work that we're doing with
That's exactly what generated the cause for us to get together and see what else can be done, because it's unacceptable and people are being harmed if that continues to be the case. And I think it'd be wrong of me not to say there's a real collective appreciation of us needing to do better in that space, and all CEs have come to the table with a commitment to improve. So, like,
You
it's
need
not
to lean on health.
Thank you.
What's health doing to help you out?
Sitting alongside us.
Absolutely.
They have.
No, I don't mean your health. I mean the health.
No. Emma and I are looking at each other saying, actually, they really have.
They have
taken this issue really seriously and have made some really significant progress.
Okay. Well, so what we'll do is last 4 minutes, we'll go to, I think, general factual questions.
Well, these kind of are actually. There's some, obviously this government had some legislation going through in respect of particularly sentencing. And on a number of occasions, you've referred to a kind of whole systems approach. I'm just, in respect of the sentencing bill that's going through in the 3 strikes bill, what input did you have on the impact that might have? What consultation and advice did you provide into that bill in the Justice Ministry?
Extensive through our policy team. So we would have input our assessments of the consequences of that. I personally don't have to hand.
But you work, one of the criticisms is a lack of consultation generally, right? And I just want to be sure that you at Corrections had input into that bill.
Yeah.
True?
I believe so.
I'm assuming we did it.
Well,
I can't confirm it. But
get back to us on that. And
we're happy to do that.
Because it's pretty...
We're very joined up as a sector, so I would be astonished if there wasn't really collective feedback.
Okay.
But we'll get back to you if that's not the case.
In terms of that, both of those bills have the effect of lengthening sentences. The 3 strikes in particular has the effect of limiting the ability for release, not non-parole periods. In terms of, I've seen some research from Corrections, in terms of reoffending rates, what does having non-parole period do to the likelihood of reoffending? I'll give you a clue. Your research says it increases it.
Do you want to talk to that? Given that, I mean, Bronwyn is our research brain. So if there's anything,
I'm just interested that
she will be best placed to talk.
I've got a reference to.
Sorry to pass you that.
That's all right, but I've got a reference here to research that says that in summary, people who serve all or almost all of their sentence are much more likely to reoffend than people who serve half or around half of their sentence.
Oh, absolutely. So people on parole generally have much lower rates of reoffending than people who serve their full sentence, and there's cool reasons for that. One of the main things being that people who serve their full sentence are much more inclined to have not engaged with any treatment or have engaged in treatment quite late in their sentence or only partially, and that's often then related to behavioural issues or a lack of motivation to want to behave, engage in treatment.
Yeah.
And, spending quite a lot of time, therefore, in high security classifications, which then also deny access to treatment. So it's quite a self-perpetuating cycle.
So in terms of a sentence without parole, the motivation to engage is quite a lot lower, right? Will that lead to probability of greater reoffending?
That's quite a complex question to answer and probably not one that we're going to fully answer here. I think that being on supervision for people is really useful. Post-release research that we have done, people really find the structure of supervision in the community when on parole very useful. They can therefore use that supervision to access a range of different reintegration services that can help them. So I think it's, beneficial to be on supervision, but I think people's motivation to engage in treatment is quite variable. So I don't think you can just sort of blanket that, like people engage in rehabilitation for a whole array of different reasons at different points in time, partly depending on age, who they are, what their offending is.
Okay, I see we're close to time, but I'm just really curious about one question. In terms of reoffending rates, how do we compare internationally? Because our prison system is often compared unfavourably with places like the Scandinavian countries. And is it true or false that those countries have much lower reoffending rates from their prison systems than we have from ours?
That's a great question. I think yes and no.
Probably not a short answer.
Yeah, short answer. So the short answer is that they have a completely different composition of their prison population. So you're really comparing apples and oranges. They also all countries have different ways of calculating reoffending rates. We have a particular method which is there's no internationally consistent method of comparing that. So I think that's probably not necessarily a fair comparison.
Can I ask you a really simple question? No. Are we internationally doing better? Are we doing better or worse internationally for reoffending?
Wow.
You've got to be out.
Both better and worse.
Yeah, indeed. I think we have our prison population has a completely different composition. We have a much higher rate of people in our prisons for violent offending and sexual offending, which have, different rates of reoffending attached to them. So I guess that would be my answer to that question.
Look, and then there's the
Wish I'd asked those earlier.
that we had. That's right. Look, that's all the time for the hearing. We're at 3 hours and 1 minute. So can I thank you for the additional minutes worth of hearing today, and just acknowledge the willingness to answer the questions in as much detail as possible. There may well be some post-hearing questions that we send through, and if any of your advisors in the room can pick up on the indication to provide additional information and provide that, we'd appreciate it. But just Jeremy, Alice, Lee and the team, just thank you for being with us this afternoon, and hope you enjoy the rest of the day. And we'll see you, I guess, in March for the next engagement.
Yeah, I'll thank you all and go well for the rest of your day, which I have to acknowledge is going to be another long one for you. So Merry Christmas to you all as well. Thank you.
We will now move to